Episode number 60 of the Carp Chronicles podcast, and what a treat I have in store for you today. The man, the main man, the myth, the legend, Stuart Brookes, joins us for a highly interesting interview. Some of you might not have heard of Stuart. He gained, I don't want to say a cult following, but kind of like a cult following after publishing his first book, which is called Beyond the Green Gate. It was very low numbers, very hard to get hold of. It went up for crazy money on the second-hand market. Anyway, he was kind of creating some waves for his angling at Savay and some other waters as well. So anyway, many of you won't have heard of Stuart, but I think you're going to really enjoy listening to his account of his angling. Now, in this episode, we cover two incredible waters, the iconic Savay and the hugely interesting and hush-hush water known as Chimneys, which has largely been no publicity, but Stuart is got the all okay to mention it in this podcast and in his book. So basically this episode covers his second book, which has just launched, called Hiding in the Long Grass. And I think you're going to really enjoy this interview. As I said, Stuart isn't hugely known, but for the anglers that are kind of in line with the style of fishing that I do and that I talk about, you know, low stock, perhaps harder waters that are a little bit more off the beaten track. If you're into that kind of fishing, you're going to absolutely love listening to Stuart's account of his angling. Wait until you hear how he caught a very special fish from Savay on the day ticket, with a split cane, no less. Anyway, I don't want to waffle on too much. I think you're going to really enjoy this episode with Stuart Brookes. Before we jump into the episode, of course, got to mention our superb sponsor, targetbaits.co.uk. Go ahead, check them out. Super fresh ingredients, super high quality ingredients, really good quick postage service. I cannot say enough good things about these guys. They really are superb. Targetbaits.co.uk, and you can grab 10% off if you use the code Chronicles10 at checkout. And actually, I tell you what, before we jump in, I'll tell you where to go and get Stuart's book, because you really, really should pick up a copy. If you visit hidinginthelonggrass.co.uk, you'll be able to pick up his new book, which is called Hiding in the Long Grass, and you'll also be able to purchase a reprint of his first iconic book, which is called Beyond the Green Gate. So you can pick both of those books up there. The web address, once again, is hidinginthelonggrass.co.uk. That's it for the intro. I hope you enjoy this episode as much as I enjoyed recording it. Stuart Brookes, welcome along to the podcast. I think I said this to you before when we spoke. I don't think you ever saw yourself doing a podcast, did you?
Definitely not. Hi Sam, how are you?
I'm
Um,
good.
Excellent. No, this is kind of very new territory for me.
Yeah.
So please be gentle.
Of course I will. Of course, we've spoken at great lengths before, and you know we've done a recording which may or may not come out. In this episode, we are starting off your angling adventures in Savay, or at Savay, I should say, which is obviously one of the most beloved waters in the UK. How did your Savay angling come about? You know, where did it all start? What happened? Fill us in from there, please.
Yeah, sure. I suppose I started fishing in the Colne Valley in 2001, I think it was. And that just gave me access to waters and people and that sort of thing that I hadn't known and seen before. So through fishing the Colne Valley, Savay was only across the canal for me from the other lakes. So it was always there, always in view, as it were. And one year, I think it was about 2006, I applied for a day ticket on Savay, which I think was 2006, which really was the start of the adventure. Um, I mean, Savay's you mentioned a wonderful water and so much history and the fish and the anglers and an amazing lake. And to be honest with you, I think when I bought the day ticket, I just wanted to go and have a look around the place, but you can't help but fall in love with the place if you ever get to see it. So I joined as a day ticket member, as all syndicate members have started on the days. There is the days is the way to get onto the rota, and you don't get onto the rota unless you've got a day ticket. So it's really the sort of way of whittling down the anglers, I suppose. Um, I didn't fish it much in the first couple of years. I had a day ticket. I was fishing pit 3, pit 4, and quite happy over there. But in 2008, my situation changed whereby I opted to take a redundancy from work. And that allowed me more and time in the week as well, in which I could go and see if I could catch a carp on the days.
Mm.
So that was 2008 was when I really started fishing it. Um, I I had a big team talk with myself beforehand, and my angling really it can be summed up with small leads, finding the carp, casting at them, moving, floater fishing, stalking. I'm not a prolific baiter. I'm not a prolific caster. So I was really conscious that I had to, if I was going to catch a Savay carp on the days, I was going to have to stick with what I had tried and trusted in my armory. So my plan when I took the day ticket was to just walk and walk and walk and walk. And I figured that throughout a season, if I'm walking the lake as often as I can, sooner or later I'll stumble across an opportunity. So that's how I decided to attack the days on Savay. I didn't want to get into the habit of 6 o'clock, the gate opens, or you can open the gate, and then run down the canal bank and chuck 2 rods as far as I could. I just knew I was going to learn nothing that way. So yeah, it was very much mobile, doing lots of laps. And eventually, on the days, it was August 2008, I came across my first chance. I'd arrived at it was August. It was the hottest day for the summer so far, and I arrived through the Savay gate at about 9 o'clock. Parked up in the day ticket car park and took a little rucksack and off I went for a walk. As per usual, keeping mobile, no rods with me. But I had a look round and down the road bank of Savay. Didn't see any fish, or there were some fish about, but they really weren't interested. They were just cruising around. So I carried on my walk and past the cottage bay on the right hand side and towards Peter Broxup's Island. And just opposite Pete's Island, there's a little swim called the Lawn, which is a grassy swim, not favoured by the syndicate members. But they're probably 6 feet from the front of the swim. We're about 8 or 10 carp. And all I could see was 8 or 10 tails waving at me. They were clearly troughing. Whatever it was down there, they were clearly eating it, and it was very close to the front of the swim. So kind of I made myself small and kind of got to the back of the swim, looked around expecting a syndicate member to come walking down the path with the barrow, say, "Yeah, I've already seen him, off you go." But when nobody appeared and there was no one up the trees, I kind of ran back to the day ticket car park. I grabbed because it was such an intimate little chance as far as fishing less than a rod length out. I chose to take the Dick Walker Mark IV carp rod and centre pin out of the car.
Jeez.
So it just didn't feel like an appropriate time for a 13-foot rod and a base reel.
No.
Just, it would have worked, but my dad uses a lot of old tackle. It's something that I've been around for quite a long time. I've caught a lot of fish on pin and cane, but it felt most appropriate for this particular chance. So, putting my stalking waistcoat on and stuffing my pockets with bait and leads and all the bits and pieces I'd need, and ran back to the lawn before anyone else could find these fish. And luckily I got back to the lawn and no one else had spotted them, or there was nobody about, I should say. And I looked down towards the front of the swim, and there were the fish still there, still troughing. So I kept myself well back from the swim, and I went about trying to arrange all the tackle into some sort of way that might catch me a carp. Put new line on the centre pin because I wasn't sure how old that line. I've got some 12-pound line in my pocket. Little rig, tiny little lead, and some putty up the line. Usual bits and pieces, nothing too spectacular. And yeah, the fish were still down there, still feeding, still tails waving at me. So it probably took me about 5 minutes to get from the back of the swim to the front of the swim because I was crawling on my belly and I was, trying to hide behind bushes and that sort of spindly little bush that was at the front of the swim. So I tried to get down there as quietly as possible. And kind of when I eventually popped my head above this little spindly bush, I think a group of about 5 went off to the left, and 2 moved off to the right. So they obviously kind of had heard me or felt me, or they knew I was there. And I'd obviously, despite my attempts, I'd obviously sort of told them that I was there. The 5 fish that went off to the left, I didn't see again. But the 2 fish that had gone off to the right kept coming back again. And they just have a little mooch around, and then they go off again, and then they come back again. So when it was all clear, I managed to drop my lead literally off the centre pin spinning drum onto this little clear patch, and managed to tuck the line away and out the way of the weed with some putty on the line, and brought the line up from the right on the left hand side of the swim rather than sort of through the middle of the sort of swim's entrance. The rod was well back, the tip was not over the water, and basically I was relying on the ratchet of the centre pin as my bite alarm in essence. So when those 2 fish had moved off to the right, I managed to just drop my rig there. It was an apple cord boilie, so I just picked around at it on the round bit, and dropped it in there with about 3 boilies crumbed up into about 6 pieces each. So lots of little bits and food and stuff and smells there for them. But it was pretty obvious, and it turned out, I found out later, somebody had baited that spot. Obviously, I wouldn't have known that, and nor would anybody else who was fishing it. But it turns out they were on a load of sweet corn or maize that somebody had put in. So I knew there was some sort of food down there for them to be troughing like that, but I didn't want to put too much down. I was looking for a bite. It was as simple as that, and they were already there and already feeding. So it's all dead simple stuff, really. But it took about 3 hours of hiding behind this little bush and waiting patiently. And I think I went through a packet of fags, and yeah, it was quite a tense sort of 2 or 3 hours. But eventually, one of the fish that had gone off to the right came back again, and he's only about 6 feet from the very front of the swim, so it's all happening at real close quarters. Anyway, this fish had come in, and I thought he was the bigger of the 2.
Sorry to interrupt. What kind of size would you put that at?
40 pounds. That, give or take. The one might have been 35, one might have been 40. That's the sort of kind of big proper Savay carp. Exactly. But I'll, in all honesty, Sam, it wouldn't have mattered if they were 20 pounders. They were Savay carp, and that was so the size of them clearly put everything. The size of the fish sort of meant that the tin of beans was going. Yeah. And but yeah, eventually this bigger of the 2 came in. He went down. The water was now at this stage a little bit cloudy, but I could still see him, and I could see this little tail waving. And then all of a sudden, I watched as he came off the bottom, shaking his head, and with that, shot off to his right, or my left, as I'm looking at the water. And I looked down at the rod because I wasn't sure at this stage whether he'd thrown the hook or still got it in. But as I glanced down to the rod, the ratchet started clicking, and I bent into my first Savay carp, which is quite a feeling, really. We've all been brought up and grown up, knowing about Savay and the history of it. To finally be stood there with then feeling like a Mark IV and a centre pin and a size 8 hook was really, I was pushing my luck a little bit, but it was so exciting. I picked up the rod, the fish went left. managed to sort of stop him on that run, and he moved in front of me, and then down to the right, and I managed to stop him again. And then a bit of plodding around and give and take in the margin, and I pulled my first Savay carp over the landing net. Yeah, as I say, quite a moment. Made a couple of I've got a couple of mates who are on the syndicate, so I made a phone call to a mate. He came down, and we carefully weighed the fish at, I think it was 41.14, I think, off the top of my head. Yeah, quite an introduction to Savay, and obviously the jungle drums. So let me just step back a bit. This is a very long, leathery carp. There are a couple of scales on it, I believe, so it's not a true leather. If you know, before I get shot down, but as far I would refer to it as a leather or a leathery carp. Yeah, I don't know how many feet in length it was, but it was the longest carp I've ever caught, and I remember trying to put it in the net. Actually, I had to make sure that his nose was right up to the spreader block, and then I had to give it a little shake to get his tail in. Proper long, old Savay carp, known as or called the little-tailed leather.
Yeah, it really did have a little heart-shaped tail, didn't it?
Yeah, one of those melted away little sort of brush tail. I don't know what it is. I'm sure whether it's a genetic thing or what. But leathers seem to have that sort of paintbrush tail, rather than sort of usually mirrors and commons. But I don't know whether that's a genetic thing or just the fact that I've noticed it more on leather carp. I'm not sure. But yes, we took the photos, put the fish back, and I spent the rest of the day just walking on air. I was the happiest fisherman in England. I think it's fair to say it on that day.
I mean, the amount of people that catch a carp from Savay on days is, I mean, very, very few, isn't it?
It is.
You're essentially there just as means to get your full term ticket, right?
That's how it's viewed by a lot of people. Yes, but and again, if I was more inclined to be fishing at 120 yards with 2 rods and a load of bait, you know, that would have been probably a good way of trying to get on the syndicate or making sure people get to know you.
Yeah.
But I was just there to try and catch a carp. I'd got no desire or interest, or no, that's not right, for a syndicate ticket, but it wasn't something I was searching. I was happy fishing other waters at the time, and I wasn't fishing. I was perhaps quite unusual that I was fishing the days, not desperate for a syndicate ticket. But obviously that fish caused a bit of grapevine twitching going on, and obviously it was the talk of the town for a month or so. And it turned out that, funnily enough, a buy of that capture, I'd obviously sent a picture of that fish to Tom Banks, the owner of Savay. And it turns out, obviously, from 2008, 2010, Tom was doing a lot of work on protesting against HS2, High Speed World 2. And that was he was obviously going to conferences and that sort of stuff and demonstrations, and I'm shooting forward probably 4 years here, but he phoned me up, and it turned out that picture he'd been looking at for the last couple of years, because he'd used my photo of the little-tailed leather to promote Savay, or kind of as a bit of a banners on the around his stall or whatever it would be. He'd obviously used a picture of me with the little-tailed leather. So when in 2012 he phoned me up to ask me if I'd like to have a syndicate ticket, it was the capture of that. It was directly the capture of that fish that led to it, as it were. So
well, he owed you, didn't he?
well, I didn't quite see it that way, but yes, of course he did. So that was August 2008. I've caught myself a Savay carp. I am super happy, and that's the box ticked as far as I'm concerned. But I went back to other waters and continued to fish those for a couple of months. But I think when we got into September, October time, I started to think, I'd like another one. I'm sure I'm not the first. I'm not the only one that always wants another one. But I decided to give it a another attempt it was October, beginning of October. I thought I'm going to try and catch another one. And to be honest, it was a very similar story. I did a lot of walking, a lot of feeding, just trying to carve a chance out, as it were. And back in the first time I was back after a month or so, after the leather, I went back into the lawn and I could see two great big clear areas just a bit further out than I had been fishing, or a bit further out than I'd caught the leather from. No fish about, but the fish were clearly had been using this little piece of water in front of me. So I set myself a goal. I said, right, for 4 days, I'm going to go through the Savay gates at 6 o'clock, and I'm going to leave the Savay gate at 8:30 or 9 o'clock, which was your exit time. And I'm going to spend all the time in the lawn, back in the lawns where I'd caught the leather from.
So no walking around at all. You were heading there. That's that.
Correct. So what I think I arrived on I wasn't working at this stage. I'd taken a redundancy, so I was in between jobs. But I think I got down there on a Monday evening. First thing I did was to go through the Savay gate. The lawn was free, and I put in, I don't know, half a dozen boilies, chopped into little pieces. And I put that out on dark, and then sat there for as long as I could, almost just to make sure no one went into the swim. And then at 9 o'clock, I had to get out the gate as per the rules. But then the next morning at 6:30, 6 o'clock at the gate, I was sitting there waiting. So I ended up doing 4 full days, sitting in this one little swim that only has about 20 yards of water in front of it, fishing one rod. And when that first morning, when I went back through the Savay gate, parked up and ran my few bits and pieces down to the lawn, all the bait had gone. Now, as I say, I didn't put an awful lot in, but I made sure that the bait that I was putting in, I could see from where I stood. And yeah, the first morning I arrived and there were no carp about, but the bait had gone. So I ended up sitting there for 4 days, dropping in a rod at probably 6:15 in the morning, a little bit of bait, and then just sitting back for the whole day, just one rod, trying to repeat what had happened with the leather. But at each of those 4 mornings, I'd arrive, go down quietly to the front of the swim, poke my head over the little spindly bush, and I'd be able to see that the bait had gone. Every single morning, which obviously kept me coming back. And I'm not very good at sitting in one swim, sitting on my hands. I get itchy feet very quickly. But I managed to stick to the plan. But during the 4 days, I didn't see a single carp. But every morning, the bait had gone. And I in those 4 days, I didn't see any bird activity in front of me either. So I was pretty convinced that it was carp coming in during the night or the hours of darkness and eating the few little bits of bait that I put down there. 4 days, I was starting to tear my hair out. Decided I'd go home for a while, but as soon as I got home, I knew how close I was, and I think I ended up being at home for about 16 hours before I ended up driving back down to Savay, because I knew how close I was. And of course, I just got these visions and horrors in my head about somebody else finding the fish there and catching them. And I just knew I had to be back. So I arrived in the evening. Lawn was free. Bait had gone. I introduced a bit more and then left for the evening to come back in the morning. Came back in the morning, bait had all gone. And I just dropped my little rig right at the front of the swim, sat back and watched. And at mid-morning, a couple of carp came around Peter's Island and came into my area. But I've never seen carp. I'm lucky enough that I've caught quite a few fish stalking, but I've never seen carp acting like those 2 carp acted in the lawns that day. The first one, neither were big fish. They were probably low to mid 20s, but they were Savay carp. The first fish basically spent 3 hours about a foot from the edge of the swim, right in the middle of the swim, and he was just looking, and we basically spent at least 2 hours just looking at each other. I couldn't move for fear of. He was obviously looking for some sort of either rods or bivvy or movement. So I couldn't move, and we just spent 2 hours looking at each other. The other fish was almost zooming left to right, just behind that fish, and it was pretty obvious that he was looking for lines in the water. So I'm probably now about 3 hours. I've been looking at these fish, and they've been coming in and out, but they spent most of the time 6 foot from the bank, going up back, either sitting there still looking at me or looking for me, or zooming backwards and forwards looking for lines. It was unbelievable. But in the end, they dipped down, and that next day I managed to repeat the thing that I had with the leather, and managed to catch one. This one wasn't on a pin and cane. This was on a more modern rod. I'd not got the pin and cane with me that day. But I caught my second that day. I caught my second Savay carp on the days in the form of a 21-pound mirror, which looked as old as the hills and half blind in one eye, and looked a proper old Savay carp. Not big, but just full of history. And that was me on the days. I'd had those two fish in 2008, so August and October 2008. But then, of course, it was a case of, right, where am I going for the autumn and the winter fishing? And that wasn't Savay, that was somewhere else. And to be honest, I didn't go back to Savay for probably 3 years. I was fishing elsewhere and catching well and enjoying it. And I've always been one of those kind of guys that I can only fish one lake at a time. I need to give it my all. I can't flip between lakes. I've always been sort of a one lake man, so to speak. There's the Savay side of things went very quiet because I didn't go. But in May 2012, I was fishing on Pit 3 just across the canal, and the phone rang, and there was Tom's name on the phone. And cut a long story short, he said, there's become a vacancy on the tow rotor. Would you like to take the place? And of course, I was yes, please, and managed to secure the ticket without him saying no. I've changed my mind. So in May 2012, I was officially a Savay Syndicate member on the tow rotor.
Amazing.
So this is now 4 years on from those two captures.
And would that have been your choice to be on the toads, or would you have rathered the loonies? I mean, it doesn't matter, does it? You've got a place on Savay.
At the time, or in 2008, when I was fishing the days, I noticed that the toad rotor was less busy than the loony rotor.
Right.
And I knew people on both rotors, so I didn't really mind which one I went on. But in 2012, so sort of 4 years later, it turned out that things had changed down there, and actually the toad rotor was the busier of the two rotors.
Right.
So I was on the toad, which was fine, but it was the busier of the rotors. But yeah, you don't complain when Tom offers you a
Syndicate.
So yeah, kind of. I think at that stage in 2012, I'd finished on Pit 3, finished on Pit 4, Golf Course Lake, and Pit 2, which are all a chain of lakes just the other side of the canal to Savay. I was at the point where I couldn't really see where my fishing was going. I've been living in Nottingham since 2006. So at this point, I'd done 6 years of 140 mile trip to get the rods out. That was losing its novelty, to say the least. I couldn't really see where my fishing was going to take me in the future, but that phone call changed everything. And Savay then, from that point on, became my everything. And I dropped pretty much every other ticket, and I knew that I couldn't fish Savay half-heartedly. It had to be a full-on campaign. So it kind of that phone call gave me some clarity. It gave me, a future in the Colne Valley, because I was starting to. A lot of the lakes in the Colne Valley are dead men's shoes or very private, or long waiting lists, that sort of stuff. So getting another lake in the Colne Valley isn't easy or straightforward. But a position had been given to me on the towed rotor, and that was my future as far as I could see at that point.
Mm.
Yeah,
Amazing.
so I've sort of skimmed over 2008, and that brings us to 2012, which for those that aren't aware, Savay is split into two rotors. There's the towed rotor and the loony rotor, and it's 1 week on, 1 week off. There are 10 rotors for each rotor, which takes us through to about the 1st of November, at which point the two rotors merge, and you can then fish whenever you want for as long as you want. So yeah, there's a kind of very much a split between toads and loonies for the summer and the autumn. Yeah. And then once we start to get towards winter, the rotors merge. And at that point, a lot of people sort of block up for the year. Yeah. But it was my only water, so I kept going as much and as often as I could, and I loved every minute of it. It was marvelous. I turned up for the first rotor, so we now, I think, because again, Savay always starts on forget June the 16th. Savay starts on the Sunday.
Yeah.
If the 16th is the Sunday, then you start on 16th of June. But this year, Sunday the 10th was the start of the first rotor. I drove down on that Sunday morning from Nottingham. Yeah, wow. The month before, I'd spent so much time packing the kit, repacking the kit, taking bits out, trying to lighten the load, all the bits and pieces that you do when you're starting a new campaign with respooling lines and that sort of stuff. And eventually, it took forever, but eventually June the 10th arrived. And I arrived at Savay to find, first of all, I've got to mention, this is now the first time I'm opening the gate. I'm going past the day ticket car park on the right.
Yeah.
And I'm driving continually. I'm driving straight on and coming to the Syndicate car park. This is hallowed ground. So even kind of just parking in the Syndicate car park was, quite a feeling. And I suppose talking of feelings, there's that feeling I got when I unlocked the gate, opened it up, drove through it, out the car, closed the gate, and locked the gate, and then carried on into the car park. The only way I've learned to describe that feeling is, to me, it felt very much like the first day at secondary school. Mm-hmm. You'd been a big fish in a little pond, so to speak, and all of a sudden now you're a little fish in a very big pond. Mm. And it felt like the first day at term, and I was the new boy. There's two new boys, funny enough, that rotor. So there was two of us got onto the towed rotor that year. I was just hoping I wasn't going to get a bog wash from the big boys. It was that kind of feeling of being totally out your depth and, what am I doing here? And I'm never going to survive this. That feeling of going to secondary school, it's the only way I could describe it, of what that feeling like was driving through the Syndicate car park for the first time. It was just an amazing feeling. Excuse me. But I went for a walk. I parked up the car, went for a walk, found John Harry setting up, who's the bailiff there. And there was Tui there, so another member. And we had a cup of tea with John, and then Tui and I had a walk around the lake. And I suppose that there's two big differences between the day ticket and the Syndicate ticket. First of all, on the Syndicate ticket, you can fish 3 rods. Day tickets can only fish 2 rods. Mm. Obviously, I can fish the night as well now, which I couldn't on a day ticket. And the third element of the advantage of the Savay Syndicate is that I can now fish the Colne bank. So as a day ticketer, you have access to the road bank, the Cottage Bay, North Bay, and the canal. bank. But there's a gate at the bottom of the canal bank where it's hallowed turf. No day ticketer is allowed through that gate.
Mm.
So again, opening that, having got the code, unlocking that gate for the first time was again quite a feeling of I'm going through onto the coal now, and this is Rod Hutchinson stuff. This is super exciting. We did a lap of the lake, but of course with Savay every Sunday there's a draw for the swims, so you can go around and find a million fish in a swim, but unless the drawer is kind to you, someone else will take that swim.
Yeah.
So it's a very different way of fishing. But I think I came out 12th out of 14 on that first rota, which suited me. The worst case scenario for me, I think, on that first rota would have coming out first. I just wouldn't have known what to do or where to go. Coming out 12th, there weren't many swims left. But I selected Boiling the Bag, which was a swim name I'd always liked the sound of, and it was the only swim name that I knew I hadn't heard being called by the other toads. So I ended up in that first night on the Syndicate, fishing round on the Colne Bank in Boiling a Bag with 3 rods and doing the night. It was just super exciting.
Yeah, amazing.
And yeah, there was a lot of people on. We'd had some really good weather sort of in the run up to the session. But all the weather forecasts were saying, come 4 o'clock, it's going to rain. And when it rains, it's going to stay raining. So we kind of went round there, loaded our barrows and went round to the Colne side of the lake, knowing that we had to get our fingers out and get the house up and get all sorted before the rain arrived. Which we all did, and it was all good. The first afternoon, I think the rain started about 4 or 5 o'clock, and I think about 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock, something like that. It was starting to get dusky dark because it was overcast and rainy and stuff, although it was summer. And I'd got Tui, who was fishing to my right, and I've got Craig Stevenson, who was fishing to my left, and we all met up in my swim sort of just before dark and having a beer and a chinwag. My first night, I haven't done a night yet, and all of a sudden, as we stood chatting, my middle bobbing went up and down again, and then up and down again, and beep beep beep, and kind of made my way to the front by the rods there, and one of the two of them said, "That's a carp. I'd hit that if I were you." So as it moved again, the bobbin started to travel up the line again. I sort of wound down and pulled into a resistance, of which one of them said, "Well, that's a carp. Here we go." But I wasn't so sure, and it wasn't until I got it about 30 yards out. I turned back to them and said, "I think it's a grebe," of which both of them looked at each other and took a visible step backwards. Now, I'd never landed or hooked or landed a grebe before. But they would say they're vicious buggers. You be careful.
Yeah, savage. Yeah.
So yeah, when I asked for some help, no way was the response I got. You're on your own. So it kind of felt like a bit of a new boy initiation ceremony. I managed to get the hand line the grebe to the front of the swim and got it onto the bank, and the line was wrapped around its foot. That was all it was. But as I put my hand to unwrap the line from around the leg, this bloody thing put his head back and then tried to skewer my hand with his beak. Frick the life out of me. I jumped back to a safe distance of about 20 yards. The grebe went plopping back in, still with line around its leg. I've got 2 toads behind me laughing and joking and saying what a mess I was making. Yeah, not the ideal. Anyway, I got back to the bird, got him back on the dry land again, put a landing net over him. And he's still trying to skewer my hand, but he must have thought that there's like the front of the swim, there's like often is on swims, like a log or a bow. And he obviously thought that was my hand, and he was like a woodpecker, pecking, springing back and smacking his beak into this into this piece of wood, and a couple of times he got his beak stuck in the wood. Couldn't. It took him a couple of goes to get his beak back out. In the end, I've managed to untangle it and plop it back in the water and retired. And to all the laughs and jeers of the toads behind me, it was an interesting first night, and one I've not forgotten, that's for sure.
I can imagine. So from then, when did you catch your first I guess nighttime carp, or at least carp once you'd had your full
just to have I call them syndicate carp and days
syndicate carp.
So I booked the first week off, obviously my first rota on my first year, and I booked the whole week off, and I was going to be at Savay for the whole week. Stayed around on the Colne for a couple of days. I remember on that second morning, so not the Monday, this would be the Tuesday now. It piddled down with rain all day, and kind of it was starting to lessen up a bit, kind of when it got to about 4 or 5 o'clock. And I thought, right, I'm going to have a move. When the rain stops, I'm going to pack down, and I'm going to go further down the car, almost back towards the car park, but still on the Colne bank. I think the fish, we had seen some bits and pieces of fish activity in front of us. It was getting less and less. The rain was coming to an end, and I thought, well, I'm going to have a move then. But as I started to have a little pack up in my bivvy to make sure everything was ready just to chuck on the barrow, Craig, who was fishing to my left in one down, came walking past me with a loaded barrow in his waterproofs, barrow covered, and he was heading in that same direction. So basically, I learned a big lesson that day of, if you want to do something, do it now, because others will beat you to it. And anyone that's fishing on Savay will tell you that the anglers on there are good enough. If the fish are showing, if the fish are feeding, they'll find them. So if you've got a plan, you've really got to get it done now and then, because otherwise someone will beat you to it. So I learned a big lesson that day. It turned out Craig moved to where I was thinking of going, and I ended up catching 3 in the first 24 hours. So I kind of sat back and thought, well, actually, do you know what? You got the right idea. Didn't come off this time, but at least I was reading the lake right, as it were, which was nice. So I think I ended up doing 3 nights round on the Colne. Needed some fresh water to look at, or new water to look at. So I ended up going into the North Bay, which scene of Rob Malin's Tiger Bay. That was where he was fishing for that story, or in that book. But nobody had fished the North Bay yet on our rota, so this year. And I thought, you know what, I'll go and stick my eyes in there for a couple of nights and see what I can see and hear. Set up, very weedy, found a couple of spots. And Craig was doing a lap of the lake at this time, and he came back a couple of hours later and said, mate, there's 6 fish. He said, I've been watching 6 fish in the North Bay. There, in amongst them is an uncaught 50-pound sandy leather or sandy mirror that I'd heard about, this sandy coloured mirror,
right.
And the fact it was an uncaught and no one had, kind of could put a number on it. But Craig came back and said, there's 6 big fish. They're in the North Bay and they're heading in your direction. So at that point, I made the decision to stay another couple of nights in the North Bay. Nothing happened. And I think for the final 2 nights, I then moved on to the canal bank. So I'm now heading back away from the car and onto the canal bank. And I'd seen, sort of late morning, I'd seen a big common go over in front of the swim. So I grabbed a bucket and marked me territory and ran back for the barrow. Managed to get the swim, so I could triangulate whereabouts I thought I'd seen the fish go. And it was a big common that went over. I managed to get a couple of singles out in the sort of area that went down with a decent drop, and I thought that'll do. So I'm still on my first rota here. There's been a few fish caught, but nothing to my rods at this point. But I think it must have been the Saturday morning, so we've now only got sort of 1 night left. But the Saturday morning, I woke up to a bobbin or line that was tightening up, and a buzzer that was just starting to make the bleeps. So I sprung out of bed, and when I was fishing in the North Bay, the only thing a bit of action I had was a tench. £7 or £7-ish tench. But of course, it was a Savay tench. It wasn't any old tench. It was a Savay tench. I was well chuffed with it, although it didn't really count. But this next morning, the line pulled up tight, and a fish appeared to have done exactly the same thing, which was just pick up the bait, shake its head, and dive straight into a weed bed. So, although I watched the line picking up and the bites start to develop, by the time I picked the rod up, he was in a weed bed, and all I did was just pump the weed bed back. Managed to uproot it and pump it back, and I thought I'd lost it. I was bringing in a mini car sized ball of weed, and as it got towards the front of the swim, probably 20 yards out, I could see a carp shaped tail at the back of this big ball of weed. So that got the nerves knocking, knees knocking. But cut a long story short, managed to bundle it all into the net. I jumped into the water, and I'm peeling at the weed, trying to get it out the and all of a sudden a mirror appeared down at the bottom of the landing net. My first Syndicate carp. It was just shy of £22. But not only, again, I'll just step back slightly, but anyone that's fishing Savay knows that a blank season is absolutely on the cards. Savay will beat everybody up at some time or another, and your first job really at the start of the year is to try and avoid the blank. So to get one in my first rotor was very pleasing, and put me on cloud nine really for the remaining time I had on Savay over the next few years. It was all consuming. It was just a wonderful place to be. But I packed up I packed up from that first rotor, went home dead happy. Second rotor I didn't catch. I couldn't get anywhere near the fish. Third rotor I managed to catch two, a 26 pound and a 28 pound mirror, both mirrors. And that was at the end of July. If I remember, middle of July. So, or was it early July? Anyway, it doesn't really matter. It was the third rotor. But I didn't catch another fish for the remainder of the season, despite fishing it as hard as I possibly could. So I ended up my first season with 3 fish, all 20-pounders, and all caught in the first 6 weeks of the season. So it was a long old blank after that, but it didn't really matter. I avoided the blank, and I'd caught 3. I was delighted.
So with these 3 carp that you've caught, what was your approach to this? I mean, I know you've just filled us in on the story, but were you baiting areas? Were you trying to get something going, or were you just kind of going off what you could see?
I was just fishing in the moment, really. There was no baiting up. It's too busy to bait up. It's not quite right, but you don't want to step on anyone's toes. You don't want to ruin anyone else's chance, especially as the new boy. Time for that might come in the future years, but at the moment, all my fishing was based around try and find them, little lead, bit of bait. Kind of try and find a chance and try and convert it. The 2 that I'd caught were on my third rotor. I'd done a night. Sounds like I'm a one-swim wonder here, but I'd done a night in the lawn. I turned up late. It was dark, so I just dropped in the lawn and dropped one rod on that margin spot. Nothing was happening. Didn't feel particularly confident. So the next morning, I put everything on the barrow and I just went for a walk. Found some fish down on the road bank in a swim called the Pads, and went back and got the bivvy. Sorry, got the barrow and headed back to the Pads on the road bank. I've not fished the swim before, but there was half a dozen fish about. But I managed to just about find a hole in the weed, and swung a single bait out. I think I did put probably 20 baits as close as I could on this small spot. But the coots had got a couple of kiddies, and they were sort of teaching them how to dive and how to pick up boilies and that. So I was kind of looking out, going, "Oh, I'm not sure about this." I've got coots looking at me, and then all of a sudden I noticed that the coots had kind of just gone back towards the safety of the snag tree they lived in. But with that, the bobbin lifted and the line started sort of cutting across to the left. So suddenly realised that a carp had come in, picked up a bait, the coots had scattered, and I was into another fish. So again, it was very much a stalk. Although I couldn't see the bait being taken, it was a stalking type angling situation. Um, funny enough, whilst I was trying to identify where this little spot was and how I was going to present a bait on it, part of the leading, I always put on an old rig because I like to try and catch a bit of weed or whatever is on the bottom there. So before I cast that, I generally put on an old rig and just have a lead about. On the hook, I'd obviously picked something up and there was a bit of resistance. So, and I wanted to get this bit of weed onto the bank so I could have a look at it, tear it apart, smell it, that sort of stuff. As it was coming towards me, I thought, I'm not sure that's weed. And my mistake was evident as I reeled in and then hand lined to my hand or swung into my hand a pair of size 8 Marks and Spencer's G-string in black, hooked square in the gusset, so it counted. Yeah, Marks and Spencer's size 8 G-string, which told me all I needed to know about the loonies, and I was glad I wasn't tired because I put it down to the loonies. They get up to some funny stuff, those boys.
Yeah.
But I repeated that the next day or later on that day and had a third a 28 pounder. So that put me on the 3 for the year. But to answer your question, I really decided that I knew what my strengths were as an angler, and I knew what my strengths aren't as an angler. And fishing at long distance with a load of bait and sitting and waiting is just not my way of fishing. So I was determined to stick to what had done me all right in the past, and if you like, not throw the water out with don't throw the baby out with the proverbial bathwater. I wanted to stay true to how I fish, and I knew that using load of bait and fishing at the horizon was just not my best way of catching a carp. But I knew that sooner or later I'd have to do that. But at the moment, I was just in, that first season, I was just in learning territory. So yeah, it was very much a season started well in 2012, that first year. But then the wheels fell off and I didn't catch another carp. But I was fishing Savay. It really didn't matter. Yeah, immense. And at the end of the year, it was, just those of you that know Savay or heard of Savay can probably understand the feeling that you get from fishing a water like that, or Red Mire. A lot of you have probably been to Red Mire. I'm sure that's a similar sort of feeling to what I got at Savay for that first year.
Without doubt, I'm sure. I mean, it is for many, it is the ultimate. It's the Everest, isn't it, of carp fishing?
It is to me. It is to me. I love my history of the sport. And the stories of old, and not only are they at this point now, not only are they stories, but they're stories about the lake I'm fishing. So I do love the whole history side of our sport. But yeah, was just absolutely loving my time on Savay, seeing some immense fish, just absolute, season making fish, old and big. Oh, just wonderful. It was just that was a lovely year on Savay, my first year. But of course, you only get your first year once, don't you? Kind of feeling sort of tends to dissipate over time, doesn't it? Because it comes a bit more normal.
Yeah.
But that took me to the next season, where I won't take you through all those captures, all the captures, but I finished with first year with 3 fish. I finished the second year with 5 fish. So I always start the season in my head saying I would like 1 more fish than last year. That's always my goal. So I'd done that by moving from 3 to 5 now. I know my maths is good enough to know that's an extra 2 fish, not 1. But I was improving, I was learning, and my catch rate, I suppose, showed that.
Are you taking it extremely seriously, as in the only thing that's important is the fishing, or are you indulging? I mean, I know you're on the toad rotor, but I think the social side was still fairly strong, wasn't it? Were you
Yeah, not,
indulging in that at all, or were you just strictly there for business?
uh, I suppose first of all, the loony rotor is the more loony rotor.
Yeah.
A lot of the loonies spend the weekend in the pub. If I'm honest, the toads weren't big drinkers. The toads, generally speaking, would drink tea.
Yeah.
I was one of only two that used to take beers with me. So it was, I mean, increased a bit over time as more and more people started, but it wasn't a wild and wacky social life.
Mm.
But it would have been on the loonies. If you, I spend all week at work dreaming about sitting by the lake. I don't dream of sitting in a pub.
Yeah.
So for me, I would prefer to stay at the lake and always have. Don't get me wrong. I've partaken a few times in the horse and barges fun and games,
Mm.
but yeah, I try to sort of stay focused on the fishing as much as anything.
Yeah. Yeah.
So the second year, again, this was quite big for me. First rotor of the second year. First morning, I caught one, and it was a 21 pound 4 ounce mirror, which I know some of your listeners might think, "Oh, only a 21 pounder," but it's a 21 pound Savay carp, and it's just different whether you get it or not. The size doesn't matter. We all want the big ones, of course we do. But at the end of the day, you on a lake like that, you just want the bobbins to move. So I was delighted in that first morning of the first rotor. Again, I'd avoided the season blank, but I went on to catch 5 fish that year. The first one was that 21 pounder. The second one was I was round on the coal bank, and I was fishing a swim called Malcolm's, made famous by Malcolm Winkworth, who invented, in inverted commas, the hair rig, along with Clive Dietrich. Which there's 2 swims on the coal bank. One is called Malcolm's, one is called Clive's, and it's where Malcolm Winkworth and Clive Dietrich used to fish on Savay and develop the hair rig. So again, steeped in history. And but to the left of Malcolm's is a set of snags that are called Grassy Corner. It's known as Grassy. It's a bit of a corner on the bank, not much, but a bit of a right hand bend. But there's some snags overhanging the water and in the water, and the fish, generally speaking, love that area because it's safe. So I've found a number of fish in there, in this Grassy Corner, by sort of standing or climbing out on the tree over the water, looking down. There were 3 fish in residence this particular day. 2 of them looked 40 pound, give or take, and then the third one was about 10 pounds smaller. So again, I thought 2 40s and a 30, yeah, kind of size, but big enough and ugly enough for me, that's for sure. So I moved into Malcolm's, and I put one rod about 2 feet from the bank, one rod about 8 feet from the bank, and another one that was my distance rod at 10 feet from the bank. So I was hoping that these fish would come out of the snags, come along my margin, and there would be 3 hook baits for them. So, and the other thing to mention about Malcolm's is it's probably the finest view on the lake of Savay. You're looking up the section of Colnbank with Tom's Island on the right hand side. It's just a beautiful, beautiful place to sit. So really nice to fish that. So I'd promised myself for a year now that I'd fish that swim one day and hadn't yet. So to finally fish Malcolm's was great. But in the morning, it would have been about 9 o'clock the next morning. I'd had a couple of liners in. Bearing in mind how close in I'm fishing, I'd had a couple of 2 bleak liners, which got the heart racing. But it was due to rain. The clouds were starting to gather, and I'm probably a mile from the car, and not really wanting to get wet, quite frankly. Just as I've then got to get in the car for 2 hours, so decided that I'd try and make a run for it before the rain started. So pretty much everything was on the barrow and loaded at 10 o'clock in the morning, apart from my rods and landing net. I've obviously left them to the last moment. Put everything on the barrow, took my remote Delkin receiver out of my pocket, turned it off and put it in the tackle bag. And as I'd done that, and I was just opening up the rod hold all to receive the rods once I'd reeled them in, and all of a sudden I've heard this jangle and then a tick, and I kind of, what was that noise? And I turned around, looked round, and the left-hand rod was bent round double, big plumes of bubbles coming off the bottom, big vortexes. And yeah, this fish is going nowhere on a tight clutch. So I've obviously struck into it and I bent into it. And yeah, good scrap in the margin, as you can imagine. Couldn't let it go too far to the left to go back into the snags where it had come. But it swung round to the right. I thought, oh, it's a, you know, got like a mid-20 sort of sparsely scaled mirror. Oh, lovely, you know, kind of came around again, and it looks a bit bigger now. Eventually got it into the landing net and looked down. In fact, as I was drawing its head over towards the spreader block. I thought, that's a big head for a 20-pounder. Anyway, it turned out that it was a fish called the trophy fish, which weighed in at 39 pound 1 ounces. So my guessing of weights was well out. And I knew that this fish had been caught the first rotor of the Looney rotor. It had been caught at 47 pound, I think it was, by Russ. So it had obviously spawned between captures. But at 39 pound 1, I was delighted. And the trophy fishes, there was a lot of conjecture around the stocking of Savay. I mean, Savay's not been stocked as far as I'm aware. I know it has in the last couple of years, but the last stocking was in 1990, give or take. And I think the stocking before that was kind of 50s and 60s. So there was a lot of, you know, it used to be run by the Ruislip Angling Club. And I think they used to move some fish in there. So knowing the sort of actual heritage of all the fish is not an easy thing. And there'll be people out there much better at this than I am, you know, on the history of Savay. But we think, you know, this trophy fish was probably stocked in 1956. So it's a proper, you know, we're talking 65 years now. So, you know, proper old fish. And unfortunately, I've heard now that, you know, in the 10 years after, there are a number of those fish are now coming to the end of their lives, you know, which happens. But yeah, the trophy fish was one I dearly wanted to catch. And yeah, it was my first big fish out of Savay on the Syndicate. So that was an awesome catcher. Couple of rotors after that, I managed from the birches on the canal bank at a 31 pound mirror. And I think that was kind of, so I caught those 3 fish in, I think it was June, July and August. So I was getting a bit of rhythm to my fishing. I was getting a bit of consistency with the catches, which was perfect, just what I wanted. But we're now sort of probably after that capture, a few blank rotors, now getting towards October, very start of October. You know, autumn's arrived and it's just starting to feel a bit, yeah. Chose the roach swim, which is on the canal bank. And I got people either side of me fishing, so we had it in the evenings, had a beer and a barbecue. And then on that first night, so we're early October, I think we are now. We just, Clive the chef and I think it was about 11 o'clock at night. We were just having a bit of a clear up of my swim, and the rod, I left on my middle rod, I think it was, rattled off. Just totally unexpected, but that rattled off, and to be honest, I sort of wound it like a dog on a lead. No fighting, no major issues, and it's popped straight into the net with Clive at the front of the swim with the net in hand, and me stood behind Clive. It's kind of weird. We got it into the net. Pitch black at this stage, and I then started to get the mat and the sling and the scales and whatever ready. But I hadn't really looked down in the net at this stage. But Clive did, and Clive turned to me and said, "Looks a bit of a lump, mate," was his exact words. So with that, I came over and looked over his shoulder into the net, and there was this common that just needed a sudden putting on it. You know, that's an old phrase and a bit of a cliche, but wow, the size of this blinking common that was in my net was, yeah, almost frightening. So we made a couple of calls to the lads further down the bank, and because we knew we got a big fish, more hands the better. But we got it up on the bank, and we were able to confirm or identify the fish as Wimbledon Common. And up on the scales, it went 48.15, which it turns out, I obviously didn't realise it at the time, but it turned out that Wimbledon Common at 48.15 was actually the third largest capture of a carp out of Savay ever, which is quite bizarre when you think how many fishermen anglers have fished it and over how many years. Obviously there weren't the size in there, but to have caught the third largest carp out of Savay, yeah, what a feeling that is. Got some lovely photos of it, and that fish. There's every year there's a tradition on Savay where the biggest fish of the year earns the Savay Memorial Cup, which is a trophy that's engraved with all the names and all the weights of the winners in previous years. So it was really at the start of the next start of the next season, John Harry presented me with the Savay Memorial Cup for that capture of 48.15 with my name engraved, and you look back and there's Clive and Malcolm's names are on there and Rod Hutchinson. It's kind of just, amazing to feel part of a historical lake. And I've that was a 2 fish rota, that one. I ended up with a one just shy of 19 pound as well. So the journey home that sort of Sunday was with a spring in my step, having caught a new personal best of just shy of 49 pounds. And that kind of ended the season for me really at 5 fish, so 2 more than the previous year. And just loving every minute of it. Just nothing else was on my mind. It was single-minded focus. I think I'm right in saying that year I did. So each rota there's 10 rotas, 7 days a week. So each rota gets 70 nights. So I'd done 70. I had the opportunity to fish 70 nights by the time the rotas merged. And at the end of the year, I ended up having fished 35 nights. So basically, I'd done half of my possible nights on the rota.
Yeah.
So every single bit of holiday, every bit of sneaking out of work early, or not feeling very well. Everything was designed for with Savay in mind. All consuming is kind of the only way I can kind of put it really. But I don't want to sit here and tell you all the fish that I've caught out of Savay, but the next year, I'm really starting to get into it now and learning some of the sort of patrol routes and where they might go or where they like to sit. And so my third year, I managed 9 fish. So again, almost doubled my quantity from the last. So things are moving in the right direction for me, which is very pleasing.
And sorry to interrupt, but just to give people an idea, what is the average number of fish per year, if there is even?
Well,
a lot of people don't catch anything, of course, in a whole year.
Correct. Yeah, I would think probably 2, 3, 4 would be about the right number.
So you are absolutely powering ahead.
I'm flying. I'm on a purple path. I'm flying. I'm doing well. Don't get me wrong. I'm not suggested by any stretch of the imagination I took the water apart or ripped it a new one or any of those kind of phrases. But I was managing to stumble across some opportunities, and I was managing to convert some of those opportunities, which was very pleasing. But that third year, that first rota, I caught 3 that first rota. 18 pound, 24 pound, and another 24 pounder. So all pretty small, and I've been quite unlucky because I've now had a number of doubles and 20s. So I got the reputation of a little bit of a fishing in the kindergarten kind of thing. But to be honest with you, it didn't really matter to me. I just wanted those bobbins to be moving as much as possible. So having fished that first rota on year 3, to have caught 3 in that rota was just immense. And for the third year on the trot, it meant I'd avoided the blank in the first rota, the season-long blank in the first. I caught on my first 3 rotas of the year, which was, just takes the pressure off a little bit, you know. But I was, at this point, I was properly flying. I had 9 fish, so 3 in that first rota. Second rota, I had a 27 pounder. Third rota, I had 2. Fourth rota, I had 2. So I was not only catching them, not only getting on them or finding the chances, but converting them in multiple numbers often, which again was very pleasing. But the probably highlight of that, sorry, 2 highlights of those 9 fish. One would have been on the 4th rota. I was again back fishing on the canal bank. The canal bank was doing a lot of bites that year. So I ended up on the canal bank back in the swim called the Roach. And first bite of that weekend, it was a good scrap actually. A lot of the ones I've mentioned so far I've just almost wound in, but this was a good scrap, and I'd got it in the margin. I could see this big 2-tone mirror in the margins, looking for somewhere to shed the hook. Now, funnily enough, that day I'd had a conversation with Jordan, one of the other lads on the rota, and he said there are 3 2-tone fish in there in Savay. One of which is a fish called Lionels, which is probably what everyone refers to as the king of the lake. The oldest mirror, you know, kind of, it's not the biggest, but it's the one, if you said, right, you can only have 1 fish, most people would go Lionels. So anyway, I've 3 2-tones in the lake. One of them is Lionels. One of them, and this is what had instigated the conversation with Jordan, he had lost one that previous day. He'd lost one of the 2-tones the previous day. So basically, thinking that the one that Jordan had lost yesterday is probably not going to be this one that I've got on at the moment. That means there's a 50% chance that this fish I'm attached to is Lionels. So of course, Sphinx is starting to twitch a little bit, and in the end, I got it over the net. Could see it wasn't Lionels, but it was a lovely 2-tone mirror, weighing 37 pound and ounces. So an absolute belter and an absolute beauty. And I'd managed to catch one after that as well on the same rota. So that was a 24 pounder. But the other big one I caught on that particular year was in early September, and again I'm absolutely flying here. I'm on 8 fish, and it's only end of August, beginning of September, and I did a couple of nights in the Cottage Bay, the famous Cottage Bay, and managed about 3 in the morning. Managed a common that put up an immense scrap, beat me up silly, but ended up at 41 pound and 2 ounces, and it was a common that had only been out 3 or 4 times that we could count. So it certainly wasn't one of the regulars. But we were able to match it up with a few fish and a few photos from previous years. But yeah, that was an immense thing. I was on early September, 9 fish, thinking, crikey, where could this season end? How many am I going to catch? And then from that point, I think it was about the first week in September, I didn't have another fish for the rest of the year. So it was most definitely a season of 2 halves, that one. But I've now caught 9 fish in the year. So my 3 years now, I had 3 fish, 5 fish, 9 fish. And yeah, it's all moving in the right direction and going particularly well.
Amazing. And which year are we up to now, Stuart?
This would be, so that 3rd year would be 2004, 2014, 2015.
Gotcha.
Sure, muted.
Yeah. And you fished it up until
an immense fish, an immense way to finish off that session. But there was a lot of blanking after it.
Yeah. Yeah, brilliant. And sorry, Stuart, when did you fish Savay up until?
Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Yeah.
Sorry, I thought I dropped you off. Sorry, my bad. You might need to cut that.
Yeah, no, it's fine. What I was just saying, what year did you fish Savay up until?
So now we've done 3 years. We're into, I suppose that 3rd season would have ended in March 2015. And that year, so at the end of that year, was actually my last full year on the lake.
Right.
Little story. I did fish for 2 more seasons, but just to cut in here, one of the other codes, and a good friend of mine who lives in Nottingham, so I ended up he doesn't drive, so I ended up taking him to Savay and bringing him back from Savay most weeks or most rotas. But Craig ran the Syndicate on a lake in Bedfordshire, and he started telling me about this lake that he ran the Syndicate of, and it was he'd left there to go to Savay, and I wasn't really interested, quite frankly, because I was on Savay, and what was going to take me off from Savay, Anyway, we got chatting. Eventually, in November of that year, so this would be, I think, November of 13, I think. Craig took me for a walk around the water that he runs a Syndicate on, and I fell in love. So the lake in question is called Chimneys, which is in Bedfordshire, and a lot of people a lot of people in the area will know the name Chimneys, but very few people know what's in there. There's nothing really out there to tell you what's in there. So there's a lot of people know nothing about it, but want to know. It's one of those waters. It's 120 acres. It's just like Raisbury, in as much as 120 acres. It's split into North Lake and South Lake. The fish can go through a gap into the north, like they could in Raisbury. And it was a similar sort of size and proposition to that. The stocking was pretty unknown, although I've got to say Craig is probably the best carp angler I've ever fished with, and his results were spectacular on Chimneys. But mere mortals, it was a real struggle. He took me around the lake, and I just fell in love. Took his offer of a winter ticket up, so we are now in November 13. We'll come on to Chimneys a little bit later, but basically a big lake with a syndicate of 20 people. You normally had the lake to yourself. If you didn't, let's say there was 3 people on, then you've still got 40 acres of water to go at. It was just a different way of fishing, and it blew my mind. Chimneys absolutely blew my mind, and took Craig up on his offer of a winter ticket. Got myself a boat. You could use a big boat on that. Basically, there were 2 rules on Chimneys. First one was always wear a life jacket when you're in a boat, and the second one is don't be a twat. It was simply go and do some fishing. If you're fishing a water like that, you don't need a list of rules. Just crack on and do some fishing. Don't upset anyone else. Just go and do so. And it was just such a throwback. It just absolutely blew my mind. But
is this, sorry to interrupt, is this water still sort of active, so to speak?
Yes, totally.
It is. I mean, do we need to be careful with what you're saying here, or is it?
There is a publicity ban on Chimneys, right, which is why nobody knows anything about the lake and its stock.
Right.
But the Craig, cutting a very long story short, Craig, who ran the Syndicate, was also the owner and proprietor of Trent Baits. Now, Craig, at the point in time that after I had those 9 fish from Savay, Craig actually sold up, and him and his wife left the country to live in Spain. So Craig dropped his Savay ticket, and when he sold the business, he sold it to a couple of lads, Dan and Dean. So they ended up taking on the Syndicate because it came as part of the Trent Baits empire, as it were. But I said to Dan at the very start, I said, look, I may well end up writing a book. I've already done one. I might end up writing a book. And his words to me were something along the lines of, look, social media is one thing, but a book is totally different. I'm happy with you doing a book. So that was that. So I got the green light around the Chimneys. You mentioned about
Right.
publicity bans and stuff. So yes, there is a publicity ban, but I've been given the green light to write a book about Chimneys, or that includes Chimneys, I should say.
Yeah. And we can mention it on this podcast, I'm guessing.
Absolutely, yes, I absolutely. Well, I suppose put it this way: I no longer have a ticket, so I've not got anything, no skin in the game anymore, as it were.
Okay. So your time on Savay is obviously done. I mean, you've got to be riding a bit of a high of confidence at this point, right?
Oh,
You've gone on
absolutely.
to Savay, you've done extremely well, far better than the vast majority of people that have ever fished it. You got to be super confident going on to Chimneys, right?
Absolutely. But to me, Savay was still the be all and end all. Kind of. I was in love with two ladies, so to speak, and I couldn't just push Savay to the side. That would be criminal.
Mm.
So I ended up the next 2 years. I ended up splitting my time between Savay and Chimneys.
Mm.
So the fourth year, I'll just stick with Savay for a moment. The fourth year, I had a ticket on there, which was 2015. I came away with I had two fish in 2015, and I had one fish in 2016. But in those 2 years, I didn't fish Savay too much. So two fish and one fish for the next 2 years were a paltry return, but at the same time, it was reflective on the amount of time I'd not done on Savay.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think the final straw, but the final thing for me was, I think it was summer of 2016. I was sitting on Savay, not near fish, couldn't find fish, or couldn't get near the fish, and a mate phoned me up from Chimneys, and he got the lake to himself, and he'd had a drift round, and he plotted up here, and and I just thought, I want to be there,
Mm.
and so it kind of happened that I left Savay, but not because I wanted to leave Savay, but because I just found this other beautiful woman in my life, let's say, called Chimneys, and neither of those lakes are for the faint-hearted. You've got to go all in on either of those lakes. You can't dabble between the two. So I did a bit of dabbling between the two for those 2 years, but I knew my time at Savay was coming to an end because my future was at Chimneys. I felt. So yeah, I had a couple of half years on Savay, and finished up with two fish, one fish for that last year. So the last time I went to Savay would have been in about September 2016. I held my ticket for another 6 years, 6 or 7 years, but never went back. Two reasons for that. Firstly, Chimneys had cast a spell by this stage, but also HS2 was starting now. The building of HS2 was starting. So, for those that don't know, HS2, high speed 2, is going from London to Birmingham, and it's cutting across the beautiful Colne Valley, over lakes, under lakes, up to the Chilterns, and then on to Birmingham from there. And what that meant was the train track was going straight over the top of Pit 2, which is run by Harrow Angling Society. I know the sort of the bridge, the railway bridge, was going to go straight over Pit 2, over the canal, over the North Bay, and over the canal bank, and then heading off towards the Chilterns, over the top of Corder and Broadwater and some of those other famous lakes in the Colne Valley. So this was all happening. It was all about to start. The work was about to start. The fencing was about to come up. The tree huggers were in the trees protesting. Harris fencing was going up. Trees were getting cut down. This was all just about to start. And I thought, you know what? I don't really want to be part of this. I don't want to see it. I don't want to sit there when I'm angling with steam coming out my ears because they've chopped all the trees down around the lake, and I didn't want to go. And to this day, I have not been back into the Colne Valley since 2016.
Wow.
So I haven't seen, and I've heard from friends and seen pictures. The devastation down there, it's just heartbreaking. And I didn't want any part of it. I didn't want to do my fishing that way. I didn't want to hate being there. I wanted to keep the memories and the times that I'd got as pure and as happy as they were in my mind. And yeah, it was the end of my time on Savay. As I say, I think I held my ticket for about another 6 or 7 years, and then dropped it probably a couple of years ago now. And I knew that as soon as I phoned Tom and told him that I decided not to rejoin, I knew that I'd regret it. And of course I did, because everybody that drops out of Savay regrets it.
Yeah.
But once you leave, you can't go back. No, not one angler has dropped and then got back on. It's just not how it works. And you drop your ticket knowing you're dropping your ticket for good. Yeah. So, good or bad, at least I knew that before dropping.
Yeah, I mean, the other side to that is obviously you're giving someone else a chance to fulfill their dream, aren't you, by dropping your ticket?
Absolutely. And I think over those 6 or 7 years, some of the old fish started to pass away. I know it hadn't been stocked since about 1990. It might have been 89, but let's call it 1990. But Tom put some new fish in 2 or 3 years ago, because a number of the older ones had died. So he was looking after the welfare of his lake. They're all Savay. The stockies that were put in are all Savay bred fish, so they're the stock pond at Savay. So a number of fish went in, and again I thought, you know what, that's not why I want to fish Savay. To the future generations, that'd be great, but for me there'd be stockies, and there'd be a bit of a every time I got one in the net. And I want to be punching the air when I've got one in the net, not wishing it was 20 pound bigger. So it's decision made, and I left Savay, having had 20 fish on the rotors and 2 fish on the days, and I think I walked away with my head held high, but didn't take it apart. But the time I'd got, I was never going to, but I was quite happy with how I'd fished and what I'd caught, and it was time for a new challenge, and that challenge was Chimneys.
Yeah. And how challenging was it?
Chimneys was a whole new level. Chimneys was, rock hard. I know one guy took 4 years to catch his first.
Jeez.
I know one chap that had one on his first night. He had something like a 17 or 18 pound common, thinking Chimneys is easy, slipped it back, and then didn't catch another fish for 3 years.
Oh no.
So it's a tough lake. It is a very, very tough lake.
So set the scene. How many acres? How many carp? How many people fishing it?
So, I mean, the obvious answer to how many carp is nobody knew. It was literally go and try and get some bobbins to move. I'd seen some pictures from Craig. I mean, Craig, I mentioned earlier, probably about the best angler I've Craig Stevenson, probably about the best angler I've ever fished with. And he'd ripped it a new one. He'd caught, lots and lots of carp out there. But they were all sort of 10 years before I joined. So a lot of them were sort of 20s and lower 30s. And a lot of the fish hadn't been out for 10 years. It was kind of one of those waters where I think there'd probably be about 200 carp in there, 120 acres. So you wouldn't call it a low stocked water. Probably about 200 fish in there, and there was probably about 80 that you would like to catch. And by that I mean over the last sort of 10 years, there's been a 3 stockings of 20 mirrors each time. So there was some fish in there that were small but beautiful. They're going to be cracking in a few years' time.
Yeah.
But not really why we were there.
And how many acres, sorry?
120.
So it's a decent amount of carp, really.
Yes. It's not a I don't think it's an ultra low stock lake at all. No. But the difference with Chimneys, which is what makes it different to anywhere else I've fished, first of all, you can use a boat. But secondly, I think the average depth is probably about 24 or 25 feet. So you've got a marginal shelf that runs pretty much along the whole of the lake, around the whole of the lake, which is probably a rod length in distance from the bank, and then in every swim it just drops away into the abyss. Um, but how did Chimneys come about? It was dug in the 1930s and 40s, and at one stage in this Bedfordshire Vale, there was something like 300 chimneys. So basically, what they realised was that the clay that is under the ground in the area is perfect for making bricks, and is of a certain type of clay that means the kiln and the firing costs are quite low. So it kind of, I'm no brick expert, but apparently it cured the bricks very cheaply as far as the kiln was concerned. And there was, yes, 200 or 300 chimneys in the Vale.
Wow.
Lots of, when you, some of the older guys here might remember, we used to drive past, and I'm glad to say it's before my time, but apparently when you drove in the 70s and 80s down the M1 towards London, when you got past sort of Bedfordshire, there was a real distinctive smell in the air, and that smell was the kilns and the bricks that were being produced. I think at one stage the bricks made from that vale, so there's 3 pits dug, 3 lakes now. One is called Brogborough, one is called Stuartby, and the other one is Chimneys. Apparently the bricks from those 3 lakes, or 3 quarries as it were, equated to about 1 in every 3 bricks in the UK came from that site. Proper. It was just a good and efficient way of making bricks. So it was dug, and it was dug deep. They were after the Jurassic clay underneath. But yeah, the big difference really with Chimneys is the fact that you can use a boat, which is something I'd not done before. But also the depth made it probably 2 or 3 times the volume of water of a normal 120-acre lake. So you really had to think about the lake in 3D. It was, I'd never fished I think probably the deepest I'd caught a fish was probably 12 or 13 feet, I would think. Pretty norm.
Yeah.
Well, the first fish I caught out of Chimneys, I'll come back, but the first was caught out of, I think it was 37 feet of water.
Takes some getting your head round, doesn't it? I've fished deep waters like that, and it's takes a bit of figuring out, doesn't it?
It does, but thankfully, because my first fish was caught or hooked in 37 feet of water, all of a sudden that depth disappeared from my worry.
Yeah.
I was like, all right, they do get down. Of course they get to that sort of depth.
Yeah.
Knowing that, being able to confirm that and catch them off from that sort of depth was a real, it saved me a lot of worry about the depth. That, if I wasn't catching or was only catching on the marginal ledge or whatever, it might have taken me a lot longer to get my head around the depth. But that first fish being caught in 37 feet of water was a blessing.
And were there chances of fishing in shallower depths than that, or is it all pretty much that, or you're on a steep shelf?
So the lake bed was basically a series of bars, and I think the deepest bit I found on Chimneys was 46 feet, and the way it was dug with drag lines meant that they dug up all the clay that they didn't want and put that into piles, and then dug up the clay that they did want and took that away to the kiln. So what it meant was when the lake was completed as far as the digging was concerned, there was massive bars of clay. So move forward a few years now, when you're going over the boat, out in the boat with an echo sounder on, you'd have 37 feet, 38 feet, 39 feet, 18 feet, 32 feet, 36 feet, 38 feet, 14 feet depth, so it was up and down like a horse draws, like a bride's nightie, and you had the choice of either fishing on top of the bars or down in the gullies, and they came from everywhere, but it really was an egg-shaped box lake. And what I did find was, you'd think, okay, so let's just say I'm fishing at 120 yards and I'm fishing in on top of a bar, let's say it's 16 feet deep. Well, you can be watching fish going, well, they're on me, they're bang on me. Why aren't I? They're showing and they're right over me. Why aren't I getting a bite? Well, they only need to be a rod length beyond you or a rod length nearer to you, and they're in another 20 feet of water.
Mm.
So although it looks like they're on you, it might be the case that actually they're eating just behind or just in front of you, and therefore in 38 feet water, not the 18 feet that you've got your bait on. So yeah, real challenge. Up and down all over the place. There is an island in the middle. So picture in your mind a figure of eight, and you've pretty much got the shape of Chimneys, north lake, south lake. And in the middle between the north and south was an island, or is an island, probably about 2 acre island. So it's a big island, about 4 swims on it. But fishing on an island again is something I've never done before. So it was all super exciting. And so the first time I saw the lake, Craig took me for a walk round. And obviously he was able to tell me about the swims and what he caught from where and how or what, and really stoked me up. But as far as I was concerned, I was still fishing Savay, but that very quickly changed. I had a winter ticket on Savay. I had a winter ticket on Chimneys. So this is now November 13. So I've been on Savay a couple of years. Didn't catch anything in that winter ticket time. Only fished it probably 5 nights. Didn't have a boat, so it was all by barrow, which made it blinking hard work. But I got to the end of the winter, and Craig said, do you want a full ticket? And of course, the answer was yes, please. Excuse me. So that first full year, I got myself a boat and an engine, and it's also worth noticing that I can swim, but there's a long time since I've swum with clothes and wellies on, and
yeah,
if I go out in the boat in the middle of the 80-acre North Lake, I'm not that confident that I'm going to be able to swim back to the bank. And I'm a bit of a chicken shit when it comes to doing things like that. I don't really want to die. So yeah, it was. It took some. I didn't know whether I was going to like Chimneys because I wasn't sure whether I'd like using a boat. And having never used a boat before, but it turned out I loved it.
It's amazing. Yeah,
I think that first year I did on there, my boating skills were awful. If I'd love to have been sitting on the other side of the lake and watching me in a boat going round and round and round and dragging leads off the spot. And do you know what I mean? It was an abortion. It really was terrible. But it's amazing how quickly I improved. And yeah, in the end, or by the time I bought my proper night ticket or proper full year ticket, I knew I loved it. I'd got a lot of learning to do, but fully embraced it. And again, because Chimneys, I mentioned earlier, it's an all or nothing water. You can't sort of do it half-heartedly. So once I knew I loved it, once I knew I was okay in a boat and improving with my boating skills, I never looked back. Didn't catch anything on that winter ticket. I think I did something in the region of 12 nights, actually. 12 nights on my first year because I was still concentrating on Savay. But that at the end of that first year, having done about a dozen nights on there, I knew I wanted to fish it. So really year 2 was where I really started. I caught some. Excuse me. The ticket started. So I was actually still on my winter ticket. So this is now March 14, and I've managed to get my first bite, and I hooked it at about 180 yards in 37 feet of water. I got a couple of mates sitting with me at the time, and we knew how difficult Chimneys was. And here I was doing battle with a Chimneys carp. Um, didn't fight much, went straight in the net. Adam, mate Adam was in the net up to his wellies on the edge of the marginal shelf. He scooped it up, and we just went apeshit, whooping and hollering and jumping up and down. The fish, just from a point, the fish weighed 15 pounds. It was a 15-pound common. And I tell you what, I have never been, and nor will I ever be, so grateful for a 15-pound common again. Just did not matter. Just to get one was an immense achievement. And yeah, I caught that one in March, which was March carp on Chim, because of the depth of the lake. It takes such a long time for it to warm up that March and April, you're still really winter fishing. Whereas on other lakes, they're now spring fishing. But yeah, an absolutely immense first year that just made me go, right, I want a piece of this. I'm prepared to do it. So started off in 2015. I decided that Savay was dropping by the wayside for me, and my future held later at Chimneys. So I'd that first year I really attacked it. I must have done 100 nights on Chimneys. I had, from memory, I think I had 5 fish that first year. But one slightly funny thing was, it was the start of my second year. I'd only done about a dozen nights. Didn't really know any of the locals. Had kept myself to myself, and was just trying to catch a fish, sort of. But sometime at the end of that season, like you do, I was flicking through photo after photo of people's captures of carp on my social media, and just flicking through them quite quickly as you do. But all of a sudden, as I would call it, a scroll stopper, and it was this beautiful common carp, and it looked 4 feet long. It was mahogany coloured, scale perfect, dipping its back. This thing was probably the most beautiful carp I've ever seen. One of those, real showstopper. And I remember looking at it and not knowing didn't say where the lake was or didn't know the angler. But over that day, I went back to that photo probably 5 or 6 times and just stared at it going, wow, imagine having a ticket on a lake where there's a fish like that. The next time I turned up into the Chimneys car park, there was somebody fishing the car park swim. There was a smoke of a barbecue. So, after getting out of the car and having a piddle, I went to see the chap, and there was 2 blokes. One of them, it turned out, was a guy called Darren. The other one was a guy called Blaney. The 2 of them were sitting there chatting, and hello boys, how you doing? How you getting on? Not been down for a while. You catching? Sort of thing. Like you do. And Darren said, "Oh, actually, yes, I've caught one yesterday. Weighed 44 pounds. Here's a photo." And would you believe it? It was that fish that I'd come back to 5 or 6 times the day before. It turns out it was in the lake I've got a ticket for. It was just the most bizarre set of coincidences that it was just quite bizarre. And funny enough, 9 months later, it was in the bottom of my net. So it just the story behind that fish was just immense, as far as luck and yeah, 9 months after seeing this on social media, it was in the bottom of my net. But I'm moving forward a little bit here, so I'll just back up. But I knew at the time that there was plenty of carp in there, and I knew that the lake had only ever done 3 40-pounders, one of which hadn't been seen for probably 10 years. The common that Darren hadn't been caught for 10 years. That's the sort of lake we're talking. So understanding what's in there, it's just impossible. So again, it just became a case of, I know that they're in there. I know they're big enough for me. I know they're beautiful enough for me. That's all I need to know. The rest I'll find out along the way. And that's what I did. I threw myself into it full time. did a lot of nights, through over the next probably 8 years. So I had a ticket on there for 8 years, I think. So up until about 2021. So just to give you some sort of time scale here. I think our second year, so the first year I had that £15 common. The second fish I caught from the same swim and the same spot of 37 feet. Would you believe it? It got even smaller. It was an £11 common. Didn't take away the excitement of the capture though.
Mm.
And then on that first year, I had a £22 mirror as well. Beautiful fish that went on to become one of the most sought after fish now, actually. But there was enough for me to go, yeah, I want to catch these fish. I want to fish here. It was super exciting. I'd usually have the lake to myself. If you didn't, there was 2 or 3 anglers on there, and 2 in the North Lake, 60-acre North Lake, 2 in the 80-acre 60-acre South Lake, 2 in the 80-acre North Lake. There's so much space that it didn't really matter if there was someone else on the lake. You got so much to choose from, and the beauty and the thing that really took me away from Savay and put me into Chimneys was I'd turn up, I'd load the boat, I'd set sail, and I'd simply be going to try and find some fish. Whereas at Savay, I was turning up on a Wednesday, halfway through our rota, there'd be 7 or 8 toads already there, and those toads are all good anglers, and they will all be near the fish. So it was difficult for me turning up halfway through the rota and fitting in to a certain extent. Whereas Chimneys was totally the opposite. Chimneys it doesn't really matter when you turn up. The swims were all grassy. It's kind of all, the whole perimeter of Chimneys is reed lined. And it was just a case of setting sail and seeing if you could find them. And if you could find them, could you catch one? It was proper us versus the fish. Whereas fishing somewhere like Savay or Dinton or Stoneacres or any of those sort of lakes, you're fishing against the fishermen as much as anything. And this newfound freedom of Chimneys it just took me, by surprise, and I absolutely loved it. The second year, I think I had 8 fish. So I'm catching quite a lot of commons, around 18 to 23 pound, that kind of cricket bat common kind of thing. There was an awful lot of those in there. The lake used to be run by the Carp Society, funnily enough. I think through the 90s, the Carp Society took it. And I think that's where a lot of people have heard the name Chimneys and kind of go, oh, I've heard of that, So the Carp Society had it for a while, but the club that had it before them, they stocked it with a whole load of common carp, to the point where if you were to catch 4 fish out of Chimneys, I'd probably expect 3 to be commons. So fishing for commons, but there were some good mirrors in there as well. And so it's not far away from, it's very close to Elstow. And there's a number of waters in that vicinity that I think stocked the whole of Bedfordshire. So we refer to some of the fish, some of the old mirrors in Chimneys, we refer to them as Elstow-looking mirrors because they were leathery or sparsely scaled and high backs, low bellies, kind of just what we would call Elstow-looking carp. But there is another lake just down the road called Coronation, and I know that some of the fish came over from Coronation through the years. So the stocking in Chimneys is a bit of a mixed bag, but it's mostly commons, and they're not just any commons. They're, again, I'll use the phrase that we use on there, Redmire-looking commons. I'm not saying they're leanies, I'm not saying they're from Redmire, but that bronze kind of lovely shape to them. Yeah. Long and lean. That's the sort of commons that we're fishing for here. But yeah, totally immense, and that any fish that you get, are sorely wanted. But I did catch. I think I caught 5 of the proper ones on that first year, but I also caught 3 or 4 or 5 of the smaller stockies, sort of £12. But the stockies they put in there are real scaly, lovely looking things. Probably going to be relatively slow growers, I would think. But they're certainly going to be prized possessions in the future. That's concerned. They're belting little fish, but not really why I wanted to be on Chimneys. But I think it was that second year I did a session on the island, around the back of the island, and I suppose just to set that story up, there are also some massive rudd in the lake. Now, I know Martin Bowler, beg your pardon. When he first came to prominence, it was through catching very large rudd and very large perch. And he was catching those very large rudd from Elstow, but apparently also Chimneys. But Chimneys is stuffed full of 2-inch rudd. Sometimes in the evening when it's nice evening still, the dimpling on the surface looks like it's raining. There's that many small fish in there. But there is a handful of very large rudd. Now, going back to Darren's capture of that common that I mentioned earlier, and that same session, he caught one of these rudd. Now, he caught it at 160 yards with a 5-ounce lead on a pop-up boilie. So clearly wasn't rudd fishing. But out of interest, he got it in the net and obviously went, that is fucking huge. And he weighed it on his Rubens, so none of this is all proven or anything. But he weighed it on his Rubens and he settled on a figure of £5 4 ounces. Now, at the time, and I think still, as far as I'm aware, the rudd record is £4 10. So this rudd that Darren caught and weighed and photoed is just it's probably a British record. Yeah. But of course, Darren had absolutely no desire in trying to do that because he wasn't fishing for them. But anyway, this session on the lake, on the island on the lake, first thing I caught was one of these bloody great big rudd. Caught from about 3 feet from the bank, at 1 o'clock in the morning. Had a stuttery type take and struck and pretty much struck the fish onto the terra firma. Looked down at this rudd and that's bloody huge. Now, funnily enough, since I have put the photos of Darren's rudd and my rudd together, and I think they were the same one. Difficult to tell, of course, but I think it was the same one. And I put it, but I took a photo of it with my hand over the fish, over the rudd, just to give it a bit of perspective. But you can see how large it is, and it was probably a British record rudd. But I slipped it back, and as it sort of was drifting off in the darkness in the water, I did kick myself for not weighing it. But I did say, I'm going to catch one of those by design one day. The little story in a couple of years' time about I spent the summer chasing these giant rudd. Hung the cart rods up and focused on these giant rudd. Spectacularly failing in catching any of them. In fact, spectacularly failing in seeing them. I spent a whole summer feeding maggots off the back of the boat in amongst the reed beds, waiting for these 4 or 5 pound rudd to appear, and I didn't find them once. Funny enough, I think I'd done about 3 months fishing for rudd on Chimneys. It's just moving forward a few years now, and I didn't see the rudd once. Millions and millions of little ones, but couldn't find any of these big ones. I thought, right, I'll have a weekend for the carp. I'll leave the rudd. Beginning of September, I think it was. I'll leave the rudd for the time being, and I'm going to have a weekend fishing for carp. And I ended up fishing the car park swim. 3 rods, 4 rods taken out there. And in the evening, I've got Darren sat with me, and we started to see these small carp roll. And we assumed it was a batch of the recent stockies. We're just sitting about 40 yards out on the edge of the weed bed that's in front of the swim, just the other side of it. These small carp were rolling. But then I saw one roll, and I saw the dorsal, and said, Darren, I think that's a rod. And then he saw the next one, was able to go, you're bloody right, they are rod. And all of a sudden, I've got this shoal of giant rod in front of me. All my rod tackle was back at home because I decided, having spent 3 months chasing them, I'm going to have a weekend for the car. I've left my gear at home. And of course, these giant rod have suddenly appeared. So I ended up driving the next morning, driving back home, getting the rod gear and having a couple of evenings for them because right on dusk, but you've only got about 30 minutes to try and catch one and get in the right place. Real challenge. And I really, really, really wanted to catch one of these rod by design and try and claim the British record. But no, failed spectacularly, but had some fun trying. But so I'm switching over all sorts of stories here. But back on the island, 1 o'clock in the morning, I've caught this giant rod, taken a photograph of it with my hand on, let it go, and been disappointed ever since. About 2 hours, I'd gone back into bed. About 2 hours later, had another run. You know what it's like. You kind of out of the bag and kind of stumble to the rod. And very often, I find myself, I wake up and I've got 12 foot of carbon in my hand, flexing. You know, kind of, how did I get here? Yeah, one of those kind of things. Obviously, I was playing a carp and went to net it, pitch black, and I couldn't. The fish beached itself on the marginal shelf. So I ended up, which was probably at the time only about a foot deep. So I ended up jumping in and wrestling this carp into the net, thinking I was about to lose it. And then got the torch and a bivvy and I looked down and this bloody thing looked massive. I got the lake to myself. I was on the island all by myself. And I've got this fish that it turns out, and I kind of knew it at the time, but it turns out was the same fish that Darren had caught 9 months previous. It was this chestnut common, perfect with a slight dip in its back. And I weighed it at 44 pounds an ounces. And took some self takes on the island and then slipped it back. Wow, what a feeling that was. I mentioned earlier about the fact that I wish I'd got a ticket for this lake that this common lived in, and here it is 9 months later in the bottom of my net. It was quite a surreal kind of capture, really. But turned out, so that was a fish called the kinky back, we refer to as the kinky back common. So probably the other thing I've not touched on here is that a lot of the fish, most of the fish in Chimneys don't have any names or anything because people don't catch them often enough. And because you're often on your own, or I started at the same time as Darren and a couple of other people, and other people move on. Kind of soon we don't really know what's in there, and we're just trying to catch carp. But we knew at that stage that there'd only been 3 carp caught over 40 pounds. One of which was a mirror, and 2 commons. The common had been out once in. One of the commons had been out once in 8 years. One had been out once in 10 years. You're really not scraping the row, but you're fishing a difficult water, and who knows how long it's going to take you. So yeah, I'm now fully immersed in Chimneys. It's taken every single minute of my thinking time, and I've just absolutely fallen in love with the place, fallen in love with the challenge. That's where I was going a minute ago. None of the fish have names. We refer to this big common as the kinky-backed common. So a lot of the names are descriptions. There's not a Colin in there or a Sid or there's none of that going on. And the other beautiful thing about it, when you catch one, no one's going, oh, Steve had that at 24.2 last year, or it's just like, wow, look at that, it's a calf out of Chimneys, and we're all just going, which one is it? I don't know. Look at it. Just very, very different. And that side of it, the not knowing, made me realise that that's what I want in my life, or in my fishing. I want to not know what I'm fishing for. I want to know that I'm fishing for something good enough, but I don't want someone standing at the back, oh, that was out 2 weeks ago at this way or that way, or this one's called such and such. It just doesn't, I want to catch them all and just look at them and just go, fucking brilliant, and put them back, So I've kind of realised that that's what my fishing wants these. Oh, this is what I want in my fishing these days: is that peace and quiet, the unknown, and the challenge is very much what I need now in my fishing. I'm going to struggle in. One of the things we talked about on Chimneys with all the lads was, the question of where do you go after Chimneys? It's just such a unique lake that you where do you go after Chimneys? But yeah, just an awesome lake. So I've now had a couple of years on there. I've caught the biggest fish in the lake, this kinky back common. And I think at that stage, I hadn't caught another 30-pounder. I think the fish that I was catching at this stage, I probably have 8 fish by now. They were doubles and 20s, generally speaking. But we thought that the mirror called birdies may well have died. No one could say that for sure, but it hadn't been out in such a long time. It was a relatively regular visitor, on the grand scheme of things. So we thought I might be dead, which left 2 40-pound commons to go for. But what I worked through my time on there, and through looking and watching and catching a few, and we the boys, the members, we thought there's probably 4 uncaught 50-pounders in there at the time.
Yes.
Now, if that's not enough to get your juices flowing, what is, and that what became the goal. It was catching these odd uns. We'd see them. They were not often, but each year someone would get a glimpse of a fucking great big fish that blew their minds. They were seen, not often seen together, but there was 4 or 5 that would be pretty close to an uncaught 50-pounder. And as far as I'm aware to this day, they still haven't been out. And I've got no reason to suggest that they're not there anymore.
So in your opinion, I mean, there's a lot of lakes with, supposed uncaught carp in your opinion, in this instance, why aren't they getting caught? Are they genuinely never been caught? Have they been caught and not spoken about? Are they feeding in a way that would make them very elusive? What do you think's going on there?
Do you know, I've thought of nothing else for the last 7 years, Sam. I haven't got the answer. I don't know. I'm one of these people that I don't give carp too much credit. They haven't got any hands. If they want to try something out, they've got to pick it up in their mouth. Yes, of course, fish likes its Savay fish. We talked about, super cute and all that, but that's not the case on Chimneys. Those rules don't apply on Chimneys because they go 10 years without capture. So there's no way that they're swimming around for 10 years going, is that a hook? Is that a hook? Is that a hook?
Yeah.
They're feeding in different areas, whatever it may be. And we were all trying to find the key to unlock one of those big ones. We knew there was 2 commons in there that we refer to. One I knew that because Craig had told me about it when he took me on his first walk round. There was a common that he referred to as the Brick Bay Common. There's a bay called Brick Bay, and he only ever saw this carp in Brick Bay, and it was, in his words, bloody massive. There was another common that Craig told me about. He said they're different fish. One's longer, one's thinner, one's fatter, one's and I believe anything that Craig says when it comes to fishing. So there was two commons that we believed were in there that were that size, give or take. But there was three mirrors as well. One of them was a great big grey thing. I've never seen that one to my knowledge, but I know a couple of people that have, and I've spoken to one of them whilst he was watching it, and the effing and jeffing coming down the phone. And so there's this great big grey one, which we call the grey mirror. There was also one that apparently it got bright white lips, and somebody historically referred to it or called it Big Al. And it got great big lips, and it was a massive mirror, not grey, more sort of mahogany. And going back a few years now, but I remember floater fishing, and all of a sudden I was starting to see these great big white lips, sucking down the flat, and I realised that must be Big L. So I was me trying to catch it on a floater, fails. But the water is gin clear. So I think I never managed to catch one off the top of there because I think they could just see everything. It was just so clear that they just knew what was right and what was wrong. So I went on there thinking floaters was the way forward, but it turned out I was totally wrong on that. And there was another mirror as well, which might not have been quite so big, but there was 4 or 5 fish in there. As far as we were concerned, had never been caught, but who knows? And they get seen once or twice a year. Someone would see them, but we're talking anglers here now, and we're all mates, we're all sort of best buddies, like. So let's say it was us against the carp, not us against each other. So when these guys are telling stories, that I've just repeated there, you believe them because they know what they saw, and they're trustworthy guys. So that element of mystique, mysteriousness, and challenge, that was what it was all about on Chimneys, and absolutely captivated by it. But it's not a lake where you're going to catch 40 after 40 after 40 after 50 pounders. It's kind of, you're going to catch 18-pound commons and 15-pound commons, and eventually you'll get one that will be a bit bigger. So it wasn't a prolific water as far as big fish were concerned. But crikey, was there a big challenge there. And I accepted the challenge and put myself fully into it, but it's not a lake for the faint-hearted. There's a big churn on the Syndicate because a lot of people like the sound of it, like the look of it, but actually when it comes down to it, it's such bloody hard work that it isn't for everyone. And in fact, it isn't for most people. So a lot of people join and then they've gone by the next year because they've never fished it, or kind of did it once and it was difficult and they didn't come back. Also worth mentioning that Chimneys virtually isn't a tree on Chimneys. It's all thorn bushes and horrible things that will scratch your legs and your arms and ruin your clothing, and all the insects are waving proboscis around looking for blood. They're all about 4 inches in size. Kind of everything's there is going to hurt you or scratch you or want to drown you, or I know I'm making this pudding a little bit, but it's just how it was and how it felt.
Yeah.
She would kick you in the nuts time and time and time again.
It was a wild water.
Very. I don't know how you could get much wilder, if I'm totally honest. There wasn't a bailiff. We bailiffed ourselves. Never saw Danny, the owner. We were just left to our own devices. And if you wanted to build a swim, you could build a swim. The lake was pretty much lined totally by reeds, and they'd overgrow, and I could probably name you 4 or 5 swims that aren't there anymore. So every year, most of us, we took a pair of sort of choppers, clippers, secateurs, or whatever you want to call them, with us, because we were always thinning out the reeds and making a swim here, and proper exciting, proper make your own. No rules. Just wonderful. I could go up.
It sounds like it's the ultimate water that we all want, isn't it? Like you kind of just can't, make your own way, make your own rules.
I think so.
Your own ethics. It's wild. Absolutely. It's unkempt.
Yeah.
Sounds perfect. And there's huge carp in it.
Yes. And that's probably, it sounds good. Probably sounds good to everybody. But when you start doing it, it's a different story. It's a very different story. So hence the amount of churn we get, or they get. I've dropped my ticket now, so I shouldn't say we, I should say they now. I kind of through the first couple of years on there, I was nicking the odd bite here and there. I'd got lucky with the big common. I'd seen a couple of bigger fish that obviously got the juices flowing. I was catching, I think in 2015, I think I had 8 fish. And then I had 5 fish for the next couple of years. But in all of these, so that's what I'm just adding that out now. About 18 fish, 3 years in, about 18 fish. I'm catching well, but there's only one fish over £30, and that was £44.
Mm.
So there isn't enough to make it. It's not a big fish water.
Mm.
If it was if there was, a couple of dozen 40s and 50s swimming around, it would be a very different water. But you had to accept that you were probably going to catch quite a few £20 commons before something proper turned up. But the thing with that lake is that you were just waiting for that one thing to turn up. I think, those 18 fish, I think the only one over £30 was the 44. And the next year I did have a couple of 30s, a couple of low 30s. But in amongst all that was quite a lot of commons and quite a lot of the stocky mirrors. But no, mate, I fell for that lake, hook, line and sinker.
Mm.
And it's probably the only lake I'd sit in now, having got a ticket, fished it, and dropped the ticket, that I would love to start it all over again, knowing nothing.
Mm.
I did, 8 years I spent on that lake, and I think the most I'd ever spent anywhere was probably 4 years. And one sort of little tale. 8 years in, and I don't know, 30, 40 fish later, I still couldn't tell you how I caught them, why I caught them, what their patrol routes are. There was just no consistency to it. It big winds, low pressure, it didn't fish. 32 degrees and no wind, it would fish its arse off. It was just the section on Chimneys in the new book, Hiding in the Long Grass. The section on Chimneys I've called On Any Other Lake, because that's how most conversations around Chimneys started. On any other lake, they'd be moving on this wind. On any other lake, I'd be quite confident now. On any other lake, I'd have had 6. It was just a total law unto itself, Chimneys. And I don't know why or how I caught any of the fish. There was no putting the pieces of the jigsaw together, because the jigsaw was just massive. And it was difficult to try and work out why you were catching. And every single year, it would start again from scratch, and you'd go back to your old haunts and you'd do nothing. Same time of year, same spot, nothing, not see anything. All the bait's still there. You literally had to start again every year from scratch. There was nothing you could take from the previous years and learn from, which is quite bizarre. I've, again, never had that before. Usually 2 or 3 years in, right, I think I've got the direction they come from and what they like and what they don't like, and still got no idea on Chimneys 8 years later.
What I don't know if you've got some more tales on Chimneys to come, or if you're not, but what was your most memorable capture on Chimneys, would you say?
It would have to be the first one, that £15 common. Every single fish in Chimneys, you look down at your net and you punch the air, and you are whooping and hollering because you've caught one. You don't look into the net going, no, it's only £20. There's none of that goes on by anybody. So I'd have to say that £15 common was the best carp probably I've ever caught. Clearly, the big common, the kinky back common, was a big milestone. But there was another fish that I caught. I ended up catching it twice, actually. We'd seen, of course, nobody was able to say to you, there's this many fish in here and they look like that. But we'd seen some fully scales. We'd seen 2 between us. We were able to piece together. We thought there was 2 fully scaled mirrors in there. And we thought one sounded like it was about 20, 21, and another one sounded like it was just a little bit bigger, 20, 23, 24. Neither had seen the bank. I managed to catch one of those stalking. I thought it was a common while it was down there, and then of course when it came up shaking its head with an orange boilie hanging out of its mouth, I could see it was a fully scale. But I ended up catching that one twice, same spot, just a couple of feet from the margin, and obviously the repeat was never going to be quite as much as it was the first time I caught it. But catching that fish for the first time, thinking, do you know what, I think I'm probably the only one that's caught this fish. Yeah, immense satisfaction. There was I caught a number of 27, 28 pounders, and I think only 2 or 3 over 30 pounds during those years. So yeah, it's not the right lake for most people, but because it's so wild and there's no rules. Here's an example. I'm not sure I should say this really, but when we had lockdown, obviously all the lakes closed, and we got an email or a WhatsApp message from the bosses saying, "Look, I've got to tell you that the lake is now shut because of COVID." But I should also mention I live in Nottingham. This is Dan had sent the message. I live in Nottingham and I won't be checking. So in other words, he'd gone, guys, just do what you want. Do what you think's right. Whereas most lakes had locked the gate. So funnily enough, when in 2020, I was fishing Chimneys, and we obviously had COVID start, and we locked down at the end of. In fact, I think it was middle of March, if I remember right. Middle of March, it was you really shouldn't be travelling anywhere. In fact, don't travel anywhere. Then a couple of weeks after that, I was I was put on furlough, which thankfully my business at the time paid the 20% that the government would be paying. So in essence, I had I think it was 13 weeks off, full pay on Chimneys. And I just bought myself a little, I think it was February 2020. I had a new man come into my life in the form of Dave, my new border terrier. And he was 12 weeks old. And I'm now stuck in the house with him, can't go out. And anyway, got put on furlough, and ended up having it was 9 or 12 weeks fishing. 9 or 12 weeks off, but I thought, well, all I need to do now is just travel down the M1 once, and I'm going to go and live on the island. I'm going to isolate on the island. I'm going to go out every 3 or 4 days for some food, like I would do at home. But that session with Dave, one of his first sessions, was 2 weeks and 5 days long, because I didn't want to be going up and down the motorway, and I was isolating on an island. That's the safest place in Britain.
Yeah, definitely.
So over that sort of 9 or 12 week period, there's 3 or 4 months, I did an awful lot of fishing, and a lot of it on the island. Caught well to start with, and then you'd blank for a month, and then you'd find some more and have another go for them, and maybe catch 1 or 2 of those. It was COVID, and for me was brilliant. I got a new dog. He loved it on the island. He could learn all about fishing and run around and no leads, and I'm being paid all my wage to fish. For me, COVID was great, and I'm very fortunate that my little bubble, my family, there's only about 5 or 6 of us. None of us caught COVID. We all kind of had a little bubble. My mum and dad are sort of 70, 80 years old, so I've been very conscious about that. And yeah, we as a family, we didn't catch COVID, which was great, because we all did the right things. But being able to self-isolate on an island in the middle of Chimneys was just brilliant. And I do remember that first, I think fishing got closed down for 3 weeks or something like that, 3 or 4 weeks, and then it opened must have been May. And I remember being shown a video of the road leading to the gates at Farlow's, and there must have been 80 cars all queuing, waiting for the gates to open.
Yeah.
And I just thought, holy shit, I'm so thankful and pleased that I'm not part of that kind of race. Because, well, you can imagine a pandemonium as they all park up in the car park and barriers are loaded and people are running off. And meanwhile, I was sitting on an island on 120 acres with it to myself. It's like definite benefits of fishing a lake like that at a time like COVID.
Absolutely.
Yeah, no, it was I've skimmed over it because Chimneys. There's an awful lot of nothing happening, but we also, because of where it was and the makeup of the lake and the land nearby, the wildlife was spectacular. There was a lot of open ground, barren ground, sort of to the side and to the back of the lake. So deers and foxes and marsh harriers, and we even had a resident bittern for 1 year.
Oh wow, yeah, very cool.
Yeah, totally. And he was almost quite friendly. I remember him following me as I'm drifting across into the North Lake from the South Lake, and he was sort of following me about 30 feet above me as I'm pootling across the lake. Yeah, so the bittern there was just lots and lots of wildlife that would keep us all entertained, and we'd set up things like little deer, traps, what's the word I'm looking for? Camera traps. It's still not quite the word, is it? Like motion censored cameras.
Yeah, trail cameras.
That's right, trail cameras, thank you. We'd set those up and see what was coming around at night, and it was deers and it was foxes and it was skylarks would be singing in the middle of the night, or nightingales, I beg your pardon. The whole package was just wonderful. And it was a shame I could have carried on there. Having done 8 years, I would love to have carried on, and I've got no reason not to carry on. But how long do you give a lake like that? How long do you try? One of the guys, Blaney, I reckon he's probably been on there 25 years now, because he's stuck with the thing of, where'd you go after Chimneys? And his ideal way of fishing is to choose a swim for the season and bait it and fish it and bait it and fish it and bait it and fish it. And I would call it boring them out, but each to their own. And he was he was successful as anyone else. So how long do you give a lake like that? I could have carried on for forever, but when I think of my time on Chimneys, if I say it's probably 7 full years, I think I caught 4 fish over 30 pound. It's not a lot, and it's not enough for most people.
No.
But because the lake ticked all the boxes for me, it didn't matter. Didn't matter at all how few you caught or how long you blanked. It was all part of the experience and the sort of wildness of the place. I think I'll forever in my life be looking for another Chimneys. At a time when those sort of lakes, they're very few and far between.
Absolutely.
And I mentioned them. I can't think of anything worse than sitting on Dinton or Stag. I know they're wonderful lakes and wonderful fish.
Yeah.
But the rat race that comes with it, I just don't know how people put up with it, and I couldn't do it. So I don't.
No, I'm with you. I completely agree. Yeah, it's my idea of hell as well. So I guess that leads us to what is the next step for you, or what has been the next step for you after Chimneys?
Well, I'll sort of move forward slightly. In May of this year, I opted to take a redundancy package from the business I was working with, which actually Boots the chemist. And I'm now I'm not working. I've got the redundancy money. Obviously, that's going quickly, but I'm starting a new business. Well, sorry, let me start that part again. When I got made redundant in end of May, I beg your pardon. Got made redundant at the end of May. Had 2 months off fishing, which you can understand, and then my desire was to complete the book that I was writing. So I published Beyond the Green Gate in 2013. And my desire with that book was to have my book on my bookshelf. But I actually really enjoyed, quite strange, I really enjoyed sitting in front of a computer and typing about my memories, my fishing, photos, all that sort of stuff. I just like capturing the time on the bank in writing. So from 2013, I kept my writing up purely for my own personal reasons. And I had plans to produce a second book, but there would just be one of them, or there might be 10 for friends, but there would, in essence, I was only going to print one because I didn't need the fame or fortune, quite frankly, or the hassle that comes with it when you put your head above the fishing parapet.
Mm-hmm.
But what I then decided after that 2 months off fishing, my plan was then to write the book, complete the book, I should say. And at that point, from that redundancy earlier this year, Hiding in the Long Grass, my second book, turned from being a hobby, purely a hobby, into an income stream.
Mm.
So it changed the book, and I've basically spent the last 5 months getting that to completion and at a certain standard and proofread and photos done and laid out and stuff. And yeah, that is now available. Will be available before Christmas. And that's so since leaving Boots, that's been my objective, has been to complete the second book. And yeah, it's all getting a bit close to Christmas now.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, it's on the way. It'll be with people before Christmas, and then I've got another couple of books in mind for the future. I've got one that I've already started with my dad, which I'm looking forward to finishing because he's my best mate. So to write a father and son book about fishing would be wonderful.
Mm.
Again, even if I only print one of them, but we'll see how that goes. And a few other bits and pieces in the pipeline. I want to fish as much as I can, as long as I'm enjoying it. And as far as what happens next, not sure. I'm living in Nottingham. I'm lucky that I've got the River Trent on my doorstep, which is undoubtedly the best barbel river in the country. And whilst I was off down in the Colne Valley for 15 years chasing carp about, my dad became a full-on barbel angler. So when my fishing over the last few years has also included quite a lot of barbel fishing, all of which is done during the day. So I've never done a night for the barbel. I've never bivvied up for the barbel. I don't use buzzers. It's watching the tip and being in tune with the environment and the river and its whims and ways. I've done a lot of that, but it's mostly in the autumn time, sort of September, October into November. So I still do a fair bit of barbel fishing, but you can choose what sort of barbel fishing do you want to do. I brought my sort of carp angling to my barbel fishing. So there are certain areas, certain stretches where you can go and you can catch 20 barbel in a day. And eventually one of those barbel will be the size you want just by pure numbers going. But I didn't want to do that with my barbel fishing. I wanted to try and chase the big ones. So fishing stretches where you might get a bite every other trip. But when you do get that bite, they're big old whiskers. So the second book that's out now, with the Hiding in the Long Grass, it's split into 3 sections. First section being Savay, which we've gone through. The second section being Chimneys. And then there's a third section, which is obviously the smallest section, but it details my time barbel fishing. And I was unsure whether to include that in a carp fishing book, but actually it's part of my story. It's part of my journey, and to sort of talk about Savay and Chimneys, but not bring in the barbel fishing as well, just didn't seem right. So kind of figured, well, it's my book. I'll do what I want. And yeah, so there's a couple of chapters at the end around the barbel fishing, and there'll be a lot more of that. I'm currently chasing some, I've got some tickets for some really big barbel, which I'm looking forward to trying to catch over the next 12 months. I enjoy my predator fishing, my piking and perching. There's a lot of that to come. I've also joined, and this might sound very opposite to what I've been saying earlier, but I've recently joined St Ives, so the St Ives complex over in.
Wow, that's busy, right? That's proper busy.
And that's proper busy.
It's a real circuit water, right?
It is, yes, and I'm really struggling with it, just because it doesn't suit my style of fishing. But what I do plan, and I think if I was just now fishing weekends, I don't think I could cope with it. But having taken the redundancy in May, having completed the second book, and I've got plenty of other things in the pipeline over the next few years, what I'm hoping my new way of life will be will allow me to fish in the week, and work at the weekends, or work at the weekends if I need to. So I'm hoping that the next couple of years fishing for me will be midweek. Now, if it's midweek, I think the busyness down at St Ives will be doable. I don't think I could sit there for long fishing the weekends there, to be honest with you. But we'll see. We'll see. It's too busy for me, but I've got to be honest. It's quite nice. I've fished it for a year or so now. Maybe 18 months. It's actually quite nice to catch some bigger fish. It hasn't got a lot of 20-pound commons in it. Yep. If you catch a fish out of there, you're unlucky if it's less than 30 pounds. Yep. So I'm actually quite enjoying having some time fishing for some bigger fish. But it won't be long before I find myself heading back into the long grass.
Nice. Just quick, I think we're going to round up in a moment, but before we do, just expand on your books a little bit. Your first book, Beyond the Green Gate, was, I mean, it was a bit of a kind of, there wasn't many copies done. I think it was 500 and then another reprint of 200. Is that right?
So it was, I'll tell you about the Beyond the Green Gate. It was printed in 2013. It covers basically, I suppose, the first 38 years of my life. The usual kind of early years at the start. And then the book really sort of starts when I start fishing in the Colne Valley. So it's really my time fishing pits 3, 4, pit 2, the golf course lake behind that, Savay on the days. So the fishing, when I started fishing Savay, I thought I've got a natural ending to the book now because I'm starting on Savay. So almost that's the end of the first book. And if I'm thinking in book terms, the second book was kind of from Savay onwards. But so it's first one, Beyond the Green Gate. Yeah, it was mostly about my fishing from 2001 to 2012, fishing in the Colne Valley, a few lakes in the Colne Valley. And yeah, I printed. So I went through that process, and I had an ambition, I had a dream of having my book on my bookshelf, like a lot of you and your listeners, like collecting reading cart books and fishing books. Got a bookshelf behind me. I thought, how cool would it be to have on my book on my bookshelf? So that was what started the process for Beyond the Green Gate. And it took me probably 7 years to finish it, but I'd pick it up for a couple of months and then I'd put it down for 6 months. And so it took a long time to get there. And I was doing a lot of writing as I was fishing. And I produced, so I only really wanted to produce one for my book on my bookshelf. And I found a way of, I wasn't even sure if you could print one book. Turns out there is a way. I started investigating that in 2012-13. And I got a sample of this. Imagine a machine where you feed in a load of words and it goes whiz, bang, clunk, clunk. And out at the other end of the machine pops a book. It's that sort of thing. When I saw a sample of that book, whoever had written it and whatever it was on, when I'd seen a sample of that book, it was clear to me that it wasn't good enough quality. So yes, I could have produced one, but it wouldn't have looked like books like we think of books, with lithographically printing. As soon as you start lithographically printing, you start talking big money. So I kind of I was in a position where I want to print as few as possible, but I don't want that book. I don't want that poor quality. I want better quality than that. In which case it was right, Stu, now it's a case of you have to print lithographically. Like, cool, crikey, that sounds expensive. And it was. But what I worked out as, if I did 200 hardbacks, 25 leathers, and 25 specials, then the income from that quantity would pay for the printing. and therefore I would have my book on my bookshelf for free. That was the dream. But between kind of announcing or setting up a Facebook page, between doing that and pressing prints at the printers, all of those 225 specials, 25 leathers had all sold out. So, because obviously once word got out that a individually numbered, low number book was being printed about the car, all the collectors suddenly, oh, I'll have one.
I was trying to say it when I started introducing the book 5 minutes ago. It had quite a kind of cult following, right?
It did. But again, remember though that I'm not an angler that's famous. I'm not an angler that's written anything before. So of course, when it got to the pressing the print button, I didn't know if it was any good or not. And then all of a sudden people are prepaying me for these books, and all of a sudden I'm now spending their money. And what if they think it's shit? And what if the stories are no good? And kind of all those insecurities and anxiety sort of things started whizzing around in my head. Because I had it was sold out before I pressed print. Everyone was saying to me, oh, "You've got to print more. You've got to print more. Crikey, you can make some money out of it." But I sold it to a lot of people on the basis of 200. It'll be one of 200, and I didn't feel it was right to then go, right, okay, I'm going to increase it to 500. Don't get me wrong, it was my book. I could do whatever I wanted with it, but I wanted to stay true to what my ambitions were and stay true to how I'd sold it to people. So I decided that no, I'd stick with 200, and that'd be the end of it. About 3 or 4 years later, obviously the book has then sold out. They've all gone out in the post and whatever. And they were fetching like 260 quid on eBay. I think the most I saw one go was just under 300 quid.
Yeah.
£40 hardback book,
Crazy.
So of course I'm getting lots of people, are you going to do a rerun? Because I can't afford that, And anyway, 3 years later, I did another 300. But again, kind of, as I say, with the first print run, I didn't know how it would go down. I didn't know whether it would sell. And it turns out it was really, really well received. And I'm sitting here now, 10 years later, I've got to be honest, I've never seen or heard a bad word said about it, which is quite unusual, really, as far as, it's easy to slag anything off these days, isn't it, on the social media? Yeah. But it was, you're right, it was well received, which was lovely. And, I was very thankful for all those people that gave me some of their hard-earned money, or in some cases, some of their ill-gotten gains. But they were prepared to spend some money for my story. And that was the first book. I've obviously this time round there was a much more demand because I'm now an established author. I suppose I'm an author, you know.
You are.
Yeah, people now go, I'd like to read the follow-up to that. So this is now the follow-up to that first book. And because now this is now my new business is angling, writing, fishing books, helping people to write books. We haven't really talked about that yet. But I decided to do another print run of Beyond the Green Gate. I printed another 500 of those. So I've got copies of both that can now be sent out, and it's almost like the basis of my new business. All exciting times.
Superb. So the new book, the first book is obviously called Beyond the Green Gate. The new one is Hiding in the Long Grass. If people want to go and grab a copy, where would they go? Where's the best place?
Best place would be www.hidinginthelonggrass.co.uk. You can purchase both books from that website.
So www.hidinginthelonggrass.
Correct.
I'm doing it now. .co.uk.
.co.uk, exactly.
Perfect.
So, now that those new books will be arriving with me any day now. I'll turn around and get them out into the Christmas post as quickly as I can, with the idea of everyone getting them before Christmas. And then once we're into the new year, I suppose I better start flogging it and get into things like the carp shows and stuff, which is something I've never done before and really don't fancy. But it's now part of my world, and it's now part of my world that I need to embrace. So, yeah, if any of you guys listening see me at a carp show, even if you don't buy books, pop in, say hello.
Yeah, lovely stuff. I'm sure you'll do absolutely great. I'm looking forward to this book coming out. Obviously, we've spoken a few times, and yeah, it's you know, this kind of angling, as people can tell, certainly if they've got to this stage, it's not your run of the mill kind of angling. It's a little bit different than that.
It certainly is. It certainly isn't a how-to book.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it isn't a book full of copious amounts of very large carp. It's one man's tale of some very difficult fishing, which a lot of people through the years have said, "Oh, it's all right." All we ever hear about is the good times from people,
Yeah, very
but
true.
actually, this includes all the downsides as well. So yeah, it's a real roller coaster of emotions for me.
Amazing. Good stuff. Stuart, thanks ever so much for doing this. I know this is far from what you normally do and what you want out of your angling, but I really do appreciate you sharing everything.
It's been a pleasure, Sam. Thank you very much for inviting me on.